Hello everyone, Omni-Sensei here with What If I Were Reborn in MHA as DABI? Part 4. If you enjoy this content, smash the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description.
So do me a favor and hold still. His grip tightened another degree, the creaking turning into something worse. You're my punching bag for the next 30 seconds. He released Nomu's fists, and before the creature could even begin to pull back, DABI struck. He delivered a precise blow to the dead center of its massive chest, his right fist rotating fully as his hips, shoulders, and legs channeled a mountain of kinetic force into a single, microscopic point. Nomu absorbed it as its rubbery flesh rippled, dispersing the energy across its specialized cells as it was designed to do. This massive frame rocked, but it didn't break. DABI didn't wait. He struck again with his left, hitting the exact same square inch of flesh. Then a right knee into the midsection, a left elbow across the jaw, and a right straight back to the chest. Each blow built upon the damage of the last. Instead of overwhelming its shock absorption with a single massive explosion, he was stacking the damage. With every impact, he fed thermal energy into the creature's system, forcing the quirk to process 2,000 degrees Celsius heat alongside the physical force. The temperature climbed and Nomu's skin shifted from a dull gray to a bruised red, then a glowing orange. And DABI's sun breathing acted as the regulator, perfectly managing his oxygen intake, muscle fiber engagement, and recovery time. So the barrage only accelerated 3 strikes a second, then for every blow landing in the same cluster, each one hotter than the last. The color pushed past orange into a blinding yellow, then a searing white, the shock absorption still functioning, but the heat building faster than it could disperse until Nomu's own body began to turn into a furnace. Already, DABI pulled back from a strike, visibly annoyed. That's your threshold? Seriously? I was just getting warmed up and you're... Come on. The one at USJ lasted longer than this. The fat Nomu swung at him with both fists, a desperate, uncoordinated attack from a body starting to cook itself apart. DABI wasn't there. Behind him, Midoriya watched through failing vision. How? His analytical mind was still working, cataloging, and trying to make the math add up even as his consciousness slipped. DABI is moving like he has an acceleration quirk, but obviously he doesn't. That's just his body. His muscles, reflexes, and breathing. How is a human body doing that? DABI appeared in the air above the juggernaut, propelled by a burst of fire from his heels. He raised both hands, blue flames condensing between his palms until they turned a violent, blinding white. Sun breathing, 13th form. The fire between his hands went from blue to white. Perpetual cycle. The pillar erupted downward, a column of white fire that consumed the fat Nomu entirely, precisely, and contained. Every flame directed, nothing wasted. Every flame went exactly where DABI directed it, and the fire burned what he wanted it to burn and stopped precisely where he told it to stop. The regeneration and shock absorption tried to prevent it, but they failed miserably. The input exceeded the system's capacity and the biological limit can't keep up anymore. When the flames cleared, the fat Nomu was down. Its brain was charred beyond any capacity for regeneration, and its body was still technically alive, but nothing behind the eyes would ever move it again. DABI landed softly, his breathing steadily, and just like that, 2 high-grade Nomus were neutralized in under 3 minutes. For a long moment, the underground warehouse was silent. The 3 students stared at the man standing in the middle of the wreckage, 2 Nomu at his feet and not a scratch on him. His civilian jacket half burned from the flight over, his hands still steaming, and he was not even breathing hard. This was different from USJ. Back then, they had watched DABI struggle and seen him forced into the dirt, drag himself back up through sheer, agonizing refusal to stay down. He had nearly died, and that had been less than 3 months ago. When did he get this strong? The thought circled Izuku's mind. Even though the current two didn't seem as strong as the one that appeared at USJ, they are two of them. They are sure if the two Nomus had teamed up, they wouldn't have survived even a half second. And DABI had taken them apart like it was routine. The gap between 2 months ago and tonight it shouldn't be possible. Shoto was thinking the same thing through the fog of his punctured lung and his broken ribs. What happened to him? Holy shit! The voice came from Bakugo. He was on his knees, his destroyed, blackened hands momentarily forgotten, and he was staring at DABI with an expression no one in Class 1A had ever seen on his face. Pure, unadulterated awe. When the hell did you get that stupidly strong? Language, DABI said. Then he turned to face them, and whatever calm he had held during the fight slipped off his expression like a discarded mask. And what the hell were the three of you thinking? We didn't... He was taken. Izuku's voice was a threaded whisper as he tried to gesture toward Koda. We couldn't just wait for a permit to save him, Sensei. DABI's eyes flashed, a predatory, sapphire glint. A permit? I don't give a damn about a permit, Midoriya. I care about the fact that I almost had to tell your family that you died in a fucking storage unit because you couldn't tell the difference between bravery and suicide. The irony of him swearing a second after correcting Bakugo wasn't lost on them, but no one was suicidal enough to point it out. The orphanage. Shoto wheezed. Are they? DABI's expression changed, just for a second, and the anger was still there, but it made room for something else. They're evacuated. I saw the staff getting the last of them into the transport when I crossed the perimeter. His hand rested on Izuku's shoulder with careful restraint, barely any pressure. You bought them the time they needed. He looked at Izuku's eyes, which were wet and vacant with shock. You did good, but don't you ever make me run that fast again. He moved to Shoto Todoroki. DABI's eyes tracked his injuries. The way the kid was breathing, holding himself, and the discoloration spreading across his right side. Broken ribs, at least 4, a punctured lung on the left, frostbite on your right arm, and second-degree burns on your left. He studied Todoroki's face. You ran both sides at full output until your body started shutting down, didn't you? I had to. Shoto said his voice was flat, which meant he was in more pain than he was showing. Yeah. DABI didn't argue with that as he moved to Bakugo and he looked at his hands for a long time. You're going to need a specialist, DABI said, his voice unusually quiet. Probably more than one surgery. You pushed the recoil further than the bone could carry. Is that so? Bakugo's voice was uncharacteristically quiet. DABI stared at him for another second. Then he stood up, positioned himself between his students and the rest of the building, between them and any entrance, angle, and direction something could come from. His spider sense was running at full capacity, scanning for threats, finding none. The Nomu were down and nobody else was coming. But he stood there anyway. We're going to have a very long and unpleasant talk about this, DABI said, facing outward, watching the perimeter. He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked. The flight over hadn't been kind to it, but still functional. I need to call this in. Aizawa is going to lose his mind. The media is going to treat this like a circus, and Nizu... He paused, a weary sigh escaping him. Nizu is going to implement 20 new safety protocols, every single one of which I will have to read and sign. Sirens sounded in the distance, faint at first but closing in as someone reported the explosions, the fire, and the collapsing building. When the pros get here, DABI said, you tell them everything exactly as it happened. Just the facts, what you saw, did, and in what order. Understood. Yes, Sensei, Izuku said. Shoto gave a single, pained nod. Yeah, Katsuki Bakugo said, which for him was as close to a salute as it got. From behind the collapsed pillar, a small voice spoke up. Thank you, Koji Koda said, his voice quiet but clear after staying silent through the entire fight, pressed against the rubble and watching everything. All of you, for coming to save me. DABI had sensed him long ago and chose not to call it out, knowing he was unharmed. That's... Midoriya smiled, the expression looking out of place on his battered face but still genuine. That's what friends do. TCH. Next time don't get kidnapped. Bakugo muttered. Making us haul ass all the way out here for you. I am sorry, I will dash. He's saying you're welcome. Shoto interrupted flatly. The hell I am? I see why hot. DABI stood guard as the sirens drew closer and helped close in. He didn't join the bickering because his mind was stuck on the worst possibilities. 1 second later, and Izuku would have released one for all at full output from his core. No limb to channel it through or control, just everything at once, enough to tear his body apart beyond recognition. DABI's hands were still shaking, not from the fight, because the fight had been easy, embarrassingly so compared to USJ, compared to what those same Nomu would have done to him 2 months ago. But none of that meant a damn thing if he was a second too late. If he had arrived to find a dead 16-year-old, all the power in the world wouldn't have been enough to pay the debt. That was too close to his comfort zone. That can never happen again. He looked at them. Izuku, Shoto, Katsuki. They were not strong enough yet to survive something like this alone or to win without someone stepping in at the last second. Starting tomorrow, training is going to change. It was going to get harder and more brutal. They were going to hate him for it, but he was going to do it anyway because the alternative was standing over a grave, knowing he could have pushed them harder. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, he just stood guard while the sirens got louder and the paramedics got closer. Osaka City streets outside the facility, 3:15 a.m. The paramedics loaded the students into ambulances. More vehicles were arriving. Fire engines, heavy rescue squads, and a secondary wave of police. Heroes from local Osaka agencies were landing and rushing in, quickly getting busy with rescue operations. Local Osaka pros were landing in sequence too. Higuri Maijima, the excavation hero, was already directing a team of responders toward the structurally unstable zones of the orphanage. Shoto lay on a stretcher. He tracked the sky, then the road, his eyes narrowing. He noticed something. The expression of the resume team seemed worse, and the sheer volume of distress signals echoing across the city streets are telling something more than one attack. Sensei. Shoto raised one hand, pointing weakly past the ambulance. DABI followed his gaze, and nearby, the paramedics were struggling with Bakugo. Oi! Bakugo rasped, craning his neck to glare at the sheer number of responders. The hell is this? Why is half the prefecture here for 2 bird brains? Because this place wasn't the only target tonight, DABI said. The paramedic stabilizing Midoriya's shattered arm looked up, eyes wide behind her goggles. You didn't hear? It's a coordinated surge, and a total 5 distinct attacks across the Kansai region, Hosu, Central Osaka, Nara. It's been a bloodbath for the last hour. Who? Midoriya's voice was barely there, the oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. Who's handling the other sites? DABI already had his phone out, scrolling through news feeds that were updating faster than he could read them. Breaking. Multiple villain attacks across Kansai region, pro-heroes mobilized. Endeavor defeats Nomu at Hosu Shopping District. Casualties reported minimal. Evacuation underway in Nara as pro-heroes contain ongoing threat. We need to move these students. The lead paramedic barked, slamming the first set of doors. Osaka General is already prepping the trauma suites. Go! DABI commanded. He didn't offer a platitude or a goodbye. I will be at the hospital before you finish the intake. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sirens cutting through the pre-dawn darkness as the vehicles pulled away, and DABI watched them go until the lights disappeared around the corner. A police officer approached, a young sergeant, his boots shuffling nervously on the gravel. He kept adjusting his cap, his eyes darting between the two massive, charred corpses of the Nomu and the man who had created them. Excuse me, sir. The students, what's the status? Heading to Osaka General, DABI said, skipping the preamble. We've got 3 UA first years in critical condition. 1 with multiple compound fractures and systemic organ stress from quirk overuse, another with 4 broken ribs and a punctured left lung, and a 3rd with catastrophic damage to both hands that will require immediate reconstructive surgery, while the 4th, Coda, is physically unharmed but in severe shock. DABI didn't stop there. He walked the officer through a clinical, high-speed briefing, 2 high-grade hostels, quirk profiles, high-speed regen and kinetic absorption, duration of engagement, and the exact coordinates of the neutralized targets. Every fact was delivered with the accurate precision of a veteran, no fluff and ego boasting, just data. The officer's pen flew across his notepad, then slowed. It stopped entirely as he looked up, a flicker of professional hesitation crossing his face. Sir, according to my records, these students are first years, which means they don't have provisional hero licenses yet, do they? DABI looked the officer in the eye, his blue gaze as cold as the morning air. Then, technically, under the quirk restriction laws and the Emergency Response Act, their involvement would be classified as unauthorized use of their abilities, especially considering the extent of the property damage and the stop. DABI took a single step forward. It wasn't an aggressive move, but the officer flinched as if a blade had been drawn. Let's play a game of technically, Sergeant, DABI said, his voice calm but carrying a hard edge as he motioned toward the shattered remains of the orphanage behind them. Technically, there were 32 children inside that building, and that high-speed model over there was seconds away from turning them into a casualty report. And technically, my students didn't engage a villain at all. They held a breach in the perimeter that your licensed professionals failed to secure. I understand the sentiment, sir, truly, but the HPSC is going to look at the hospital bills and the property damage, and the HPSC can send the bill to my office. DABI cut in, his voice steady, eyes flashing with a cold, controlled intensity. But before anyone files anything, you might want to check regional dispatch, because you've got 5 active war zones across Kansai right now, with Nomu tearing through shopping districts in Hosu and causing damage in Nara. He held the officer's gaze, not raising his voice, but making every word land. My students didn't break the law. They held a line that would have collapsed without them. And if you still want to file an illegal quirk use report against 3 kids currently in a trauma ward for doing the job your system failed to handle, go ahead and do it, because I will make sure the media receives that report along with the footage of the civilians they pulled out alive. The officer's throat hitched. He looked at his notepad, then at the smoking ruins, and finally back at the man. He slowly clicked his pen shut and tucked the notepad into his breast pocket. The scene is still being processed, sir. I will list them as assisting civilian witnesses in the preliminary brief. Wise choice, DABI muttered. He turned away, his mind already drifting from the bureaucracy to something that had been bugging him for a while. There was an itch under his skin, a frantic screaming in his nerves that wanted him to be everywhere at once. Is it due to arachnid genome? He wondered, his eyes tracking a police helicopter banking toward a fresh plume of smoke in the distance. He couldn't pin it on anything else, this visceral, sensational pull to leap into the fray and save everything in his line of sight. Felt less like duty and more like hunger. Buzz? DABI's phone buzzed and he pulled it out from his pocket. Shota Aizawa. Great. DABI exhaled, his thumb hovering over the green icon. Here we go. I can already hear the lecture about unauthorized deployment and reckless endangerment. But when he swiped to answer, the lecture didn't come. There was only a heavy, jagged silence. The kind of dead air that wasn't empty, but filled with the sound of someone holding their world together with both hands. What happened? Can you move somewhere with fewer people around you? Aizawa's voice was flat. Yeah, hold on. DABI didn't argue. He stepped away from the cluster of shouting officers and the yellow tape and into the deep shadow between two industrial shells. Okay, you can talk. Listen to me carefully and don't interrupt, because I need to get this out before you decide to move. Aizawa took a breath that sounded like a rasp. Nobody is critically injured. Both Eri and Rumi are safe. And injured? What do you mean, injured? What happened at the campus? DABI, just shut up and let me finish. Was there a breach? A group attempted to take Eri from your apartment tonight. Aizawa cut through. Rumi engaged them, 5 hostiles, and the situation has been contained, with all of them now in custody. Eri is unharmed, not a single scratch on her, and Rumi is with Recovery Girl. She's stable and conscious, but she is injured, so listen to me. It's over, and the situation is under control. Aizawa was talking to nobody. Hello? Aizawa pulled the phone back to check the screen, saw the call was still connected, and tried again. Hello? DABI, hello? The phone was on the ground. It lay face up on the cracked screen in the shadow between the buildings, the speaker emitting a tiny, tinny version of Aizawa's frantic voice to the empty air. 2 steps from where the device had landed, the pavement had buckled. A fresh crack split the ground, deep and radiating outward in a starburst pattern, as if something extremely heavy or fast had launched from that exact spot with enough force to shatter the street. In the sky above Osaka, everyone stopped. The police, the paramedics, the media crews in their hovering helicopters, and the locals watching from their balconies. They all tracked the same thing. It looked like a shooting star going the wrong way, rising from the earth into the sky, trailing blue-white fire and accelerating with a roar like an overfed jet engine. It climbed past the buildings, past the helicopter, past anything in the Osaka skyline should reach, then banked hard toward the east, toward Tokyo, and vanished. If DABI had been angry before about his students, the Nomu, then what he felt now had no name in any language he knew. Someone had crossed his threshold, had stood in the room where Eri slept, and had forced Rumi to bleed just to keep that danger from reaching his daughter. Hello? Hello? Shota Aizawa stared at the phone, the call still connected with no one on the other end. He didn't even hang up, he just left. Vlad King stood in the jagged mouth of what used to be the apartment's hallway. He reached out, plucked the phone from Aizawa's hand, and pressed it to his own mask. Hello? DABI, this is Snipe. Can you hear me? He said, waiting for a beat before pulling the phone back to check it. Yeah, the line's still open, but there's no response. When has that man ever explained himself to anyone? Aizawa's voice was flat, exhausted. He just does whatever he wants, always and every single time. He hears 2 sentences, decides he has enough information, and then just... He made a gesture that encompassed the concept of a person launching themselves into the sky without finishing a phone call. He does that. Vlad King handed the phone back, and they stood there for a moment in silence. So, Vlad King said, how long until he gets here? From Osaka? At the speed he was probably moving when he left. Aizawa did the math and didn't like the answer. Not long enough. Not long enough for what? For any of us to figure out what to say to him when he sees the apartment. They both turned to look, and the apartment resembled something violently torn apart rather than lived in, with the drywall gouged by deep, predatory claw marks. Rumi's blood was a dark, erratic spray across the floor and up the plaster. The exterior wall was simply gone, revealing the craters in the courtyard below. Eri's bedroom door was a splintered wreck, the hinges twisted like taffy, and her mattress had been ripped open in the struggle. Right? Vlad King exhaled. I am going to go check the perimeter again. You checked it 10 minutes ago, Vlad. I am going to check it again and very thoroughly this time around, and preferably from a location that isn't in his direct flight path. He didn't wait for an argument as he turned and vanished into the shadows of the stairwell. Shota Aizawa stood alone for a moment. The situation was technically under control. Nine's team is in custody with Chimera, Mummy, and Slice restrained and unconscious, while Nine himself is being loaded onto a reinforced transport. Rumi was with Recovery Girl, and Eri slept unharmed in his capture scarf beside the small blonde girl, what remained of Toga, clutching the fabric. Everything was handled. "I need to go check on them," he said, already moving. "Because if Eri destabilizes again and her horn spikes, I have to be there to suppress it, so that's the priority." It was a valid priority, but also a very convenient reason to not be the first person DABI saw when he landed in a state of fury that was likely registering on seismographs across the Kanto region. Hey! Vlad King's voice boomed from the end of the corridor as he saw Shota retreating. "Where the hell are you going? Someone has to be here when the ghost lands. Someone has to explain the..." "Shota, are you seriously just..." Nobody was listening to him. A few hours had passed and the sky over Osaka was starting to lighten at the edges. That gray, pre-dawn wash that made everything look flat and exhausted. A figure approached through the cordon of emergency vehicles and gathered heroes. Large and imposing, flames crackling around his shoulders despite the early hour, casting long shadows across the pavement. Endeavor. He had been in Hosu 60 minutes ago, 350 kilometers away, standing over the carbonized remains of his own Nomu engagement. The moment the dispatch frequency crackled with the location, Osaka, and the specific student IDs involved, the number 2 hero hadn't waited for a debit. He had commandeered a private chopper and crossed the distance in the fastest time the pilot had ever flown. Enji Todoroki looked exactly as he had at the sports festival, powerful, upright, completely in command, his costume barely singed despite putting down 2 Nomu less than 2 hours ago. His turquoise eyes swept the destroyed facility, the containment vehicles, the scorch marks, the craters, and the sheer scale of structural damage 3 teenagers and 2 bioweapons had produced in a single engagement. His gaze snapped to Higuri Maijima, the excavation hero, who was overseeing the structural stabilization. "Maijima," Endeavor's voice carried without him raising it. "I was told UA students were involved at this site." Maijima turned, blinked once at the number 2 hero standing in front of him at 4 in the morning in Osaka, and adjusted fast. "Yes, sir. 3 freshmen from Class 1A were the primary combatants. Izuku Midoriya, Katsuki Bakugo, and..." Maijima's voice trailed off as he saw the minute tightening of Endeavor's jaw. He finished the name with a quieter, more somber tone. "And Shoto Todoroki." Endeavor's mantle flared, the flames on his shoulders licking the air with a sudden, jagged hunger. "Where are they now?" "They've been taken to Osaka General," came the reply. "And the ambulances cleared the site about 20 minutes ago, with the preliminary report listing them as stable, though it was bad, high-output quark exhaustion, blunt force trauma, and severe structural damage, and they were in critical condition when they were transported." Endeavor didn't move, but the temperature around him jumped 5 degrees. "And the hostiles?" 2 specialized units, both neutralized on site. Maijima said, gesturing toward the far end of the facility where hazmat teams were securing what remained of the creatures. "They're being processed now." Endeavor turned to leave, his boots grinding the scorched concrete. "I'm going to the hospital." "You should, sir," Maijima called out, stopping the giant in his tracks. "Your son fought like a man tonight. Every one of them did, holding their ground when there was nowhere left to fall back to, and they protected civilians who couldn't protect themselves." Maijima paused, offering what he thought was the highest praise a man like Enji Todoroki could receive. "That's real heroism, sir, and it's not surprising, not with the blood he carries." Maijima meant it as a compliment, a son reflecting well on his father, the natural order of things. Endeavor looked at him sharply, standing in the spot where his youngest son had nearly bled out. The compliment stung with a visceral, nameless shame. He didn't feel pride, but a cold, hollow weight in his chest. A realization that Shoto's heroism was a direct result of being backed into a corner he should never have been in. He turned to leave, then paused mid-step. "How is Toy?" he caught himself. "How is Blue Sun?" The question carried the same weight as when he had asked about Shoto Todoroki. He had fought 2 of those things alone. There should have been injuries. "He's physically fine, sir," Maijima replied, checking his tablet. He gave a quick clinical brief to the local sergeant, verified the threat was neutralized, and then he was gone, launched himself out before the first backup hero could even offer him a medkit. Enji Todoroki gave a single, stiff nod. He didn't say another word, and moved toward the east. The sun was coming up when Endeavor reached Osaka General and the hospital was running at full capacity. Every hallway had medical staff moving at double speed. The waiting room was full, and the aftermath of 5 simultaneous attacks across the region had turned the facility into something closer to a field hospital than a civilian medical center. Izuka Midoriya was in the ICU. Both his arms in casts, his left leg immobilized in a brace that ran from hip to ankle, and 4 in his neck because the veins in his arms had collapsed. He was connected to more machines than seemed reasonable for a single patient. Heart monitor, oxygen, blood pressure, 2 separate drip lines. Katsuki Bakugo was still in surgery. The damage to his hands, the skin gone, nerves shredded, fine motor structures that a hero with an explosion quirk absolutely could not function without. Required microsurgery. Specialists had been called in, they had been working for hours and would be working for hours more. Shoto Todoroki was in the recovery ward. His lung had been patched, his ribs set and stabilized, his core temperature brought back to normal. Koji Koda was physically untouched. Yet, the hospital's trauma team was with him anyway. He had spent hours bound and gagged in a dark room while his friends were dismantled outside his door to save him. Endeavor sat in the waiting room. The chair was too small for him. His knees were practically at his chest, and the plastic armrests creaked under his forearms. His flames were out, the way they had been in the UA hospital hallway, and without them he looked like what he was. A large, exhausted man in a singed hero costume, sitting alone in a hospital at dawn. His own fight in Hosu had been intense. One Nomu, a populated district, civilians to protect, collateral to minimize, and then the helicopter. Then, after the drive from the helipad, he had been running on adrenaline and fury for hours, and now he was sitting still. The realization that Shoto was out of surgery, breathing, and alive hit him all at once as he sat still after the drive from the helipad. He leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor. Meanwhile, 400 kilometers to the east, DABI had reached the UA. He didn't land so much as arrive. The faculty residences were visible from 2 kilometers out, or what was left of them. Even from altitude, even at the speed he was moving, DABI could see the damage. The shattered exterior wall of his apartment, the craters in the courtyard, the uprooted Zelkova trees, all of it lit by emergency lights still strobing across that corner of campus, washing the scene in pulsing red and white. He killed his thrust at the last possible microsecond. A violent burst of blue flame acted as a retro-rocket, scorching the stone beneath him into glass before he hit the courtyard. The impact carved a fresh crater into a surface already ravaged by battle. DABI straightened slowly. He stood a moment in the settling dust, his frame rigid. The total concentration rhythm was a ragged, whistling hiss in his chest. He had redlined his lungs for hundreds of kilometers, and now the friction heat was bleeding off his shoulders in thick, roiling steam. His civilian jacket hung in charred ribbons. DABI's hands hung at his sides, fingers curling and uncurling as the air around them began to heat. Not fire yet, but the moment before ignition. He didn't take the stairs and went up in a single, blurring leap, catching the edge of the shattered balcony and vaulting over. His boots hit the living room floor with a crunch of safety glass. The apartment was destroyed. He had known it would be from what Shota Aizawa told him. But seeing it was different, and what stood before him now had teeth. Eri's shoes were still by the door, lined up neatly, small white straps buckled just the way she had learned, dusted with plaster but untouched, while 3 feet away the floor was gouged down to the subfloor by claws. The fridge still held the crayon drawings. Rumi sketched with oversized rabbit ears and a smile too wide, hanging by a single magnet with the corner torn where debris had grazed it. The bedroom door was gone, ripped from its hinges, and through the doorway the mattress lay split in 3 clean lines, stuffing spilling out. Eri's bed, where she slept, where he would sit at the edge and rest a hand on her head until she drifted back to sleep. Something moved in the hallway. Dabi's head snapped toward it, his hands rising as blue fire gathered in his palms, his senses screaming, "It's me!" Vlad King stepped into view with both hands raised, palms out. "It's just me, Ken, so don't burn the rest of the building down, Dabi." Dabi's fire did not go out. It stayed in his palms, flickering and casting blue light across the wrecked hallway. "Where is Eri?" It was a demand stripped of all humanity. "In the recovery girl's office," Vlad said, keeping his gaze fixed on Dabi's hands as if one wrong word might set something off. "And as Aizawa mentioned in the call, Eri is completely unharmed." "What about Rumi?" "She's there too, with the recovery girl," Vlad added, steady but careful. "She took some heavy hits, but..." Dabi was already moving, past Vlad King, through the hallway, toward the door, his steps leaving faint scorch marks along the floorboards. "Dabi, hold on, just..." Vlad King turned after him. "All 5 hostiles are in custody, and a villain named Nine is..." The front door hissed shut, and Vlad King found himself explaining the tactical situation to empty space. He stood there for a moment, taking in the wreckage, then glanced down at the scorched floor. "Yeah, sure," he muttered to no one. "I will just stay here and guard the rec department on my own. No problem." Dabi crossed the campus in minutes, cutting straight through courtyards and over buildings, clearing gaps that would have required ladders for anyone else. He reached Recovery Girl's office and stopped at the door, his hand settling on the handle without turning it. He stood there and took a long breath. The rage was still there, all of it, every degree of it, but something else was sitting on top of it now, pressing it down. Or rather, a weight he was terrified to name. Fear. Aizawa had said there were no scratches, and he was a man of his word. Dabi trusted his judgment with his life and with Eri's, which mattered more. But he needed to see her with his own eyes, check her breathing and confirm with every sense he had that she was whole and alive and unscratched. And he needed to see Rumi, who had fought 5 intruders in their home to protect their daughter and bled across the hallway, walls, and floor, now conscious and stable, which meant she was alive, and that was all that mattered, though those words covered a wide range of conditions, and some of them. He turned the handle. The office was dim. Recovery Girl had the overhead lights off, the room lit by a single desk lamp casting a warm yellow glow as medical equipment hummed softly in the background. The air clean with antiseptic and completely at odds with everything Dabi had seen in the last hour. Rumi was on the bed closest to the door, and she looked like she had been put through a war. Both arms were wrapped in bandages from wrist to shoulder, burn dressings covering her left calf and hip, with gauze across her cheek and the bridge of her nose and a protective patch over her left eye. Her right arm rested in a sling, and beneath the hospital gown more bandages were visible around her torso. She was awake, and the moment the door opened, her head turned. "Hey, Patchwork." Her voice was hoarse, the sound of someone who had screamed their lungs raw. Dabi stood in the doorway, not moving for a few seconds. "You look like hell. You should see the other guys." I gave them a real warm welcome. He walked to the bedside, the weight of the last few hours finally pulling at his knees as he sat on the edge of the mattress. He looked at the stitches and the way her eye was beginning to puff shut. His hand reached out, trembling with a fine, high-frequency vibration, and stopped an inch from her face, as if his touch might be the thing that finally broke her. Rumi didn't wait. She reached out with her good hand, grabbed his wrist, and pulled his palm firmly against her bruised cheek. "I am fine," she said. "Stop making that weird face." "What face?" "That one, where you look like you're about to incinerate everything in a 50-kilometer radius and then have a midlife crisis about it afterward." She turned her head slightly, pressing a firm, brief kiss into the center of his palm. "I am fine, DABI. I handled the house." She let out a weak, wheezing laugh. "I just saw the Osaka site coverage, and don't tell me you actually went head-on with two high-end nomas dressed like that, because you look like you've been dragged behind a jet at full throttle. And indeed, DABI's civil dress is a mess. You're hardly in a position to judge," he shot back, a faint edge of disbelief in his voice, "considering you took on 5 A-rank villains dressed in your pajamas." "Hey, first of all, I was not in pajamas," she replied, straightening slightly with mock offense. "It was a tank top and shorts, which, if we're being honest, is practically my hero costume minus the spandex, so I would say I was perfectly dressed for the occasion." "Rumi." He cut her off, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a desperate, silent intensity. The joking died in her eyes, replaced by something raw and honest. "They came for Eri." Her voice lost all humor instantly. DABI said nothing, leaning forward to rest his forehead against hers and staying there with his eyes closed, breathing slowly as his whole body shook in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible, "for protecting her. Don't you dare thank me." Rumi's voice was fierce, even through the rasp of her torn throat. Her good hand gripped the front of his scorched shirt, pulling him an inch closer. "She's my daughter, too." They stayed like that for a long moment. DABI pulled back. "Where is she?" Rumi tilted her head toward the other side of the room. "She's behind that curtain. Aizawa was with her a moment ago, though I get the feeling he either stepped out to give us some space or decided, very deliberately, to avoid running into you right now." DABI was already standing as he crossed the room, pulled back the curtain, and stopped. Eri was asleep on a small medical bed, tucked in carefully, her white hair fanned across the pillow. Her horn had returned to its normal size, a small nub barely visible beneath her bangs, and her breathing was slow, deep, and even. There was not a mark on her, her face clean, her arms uninjured, her small hands resting on the blanket, perfect and whole. DABI sank to the floor beside the bed and sat there. He stretched his legs out, tipped his head back against the mattress, and finally, for the first time since he left Osaka, he let his shoulders drop. "Papa." Eri's voice was thick with the fog of deep sleep, that half-conscious murmur of a child who knows, even in their dreams, that safety has finally arrived. "Yeah." His voice was rough. "It's me. I am right here with you. You're back." "Yep, I did." Her fingers tightened in his hair as she shifted on the bed, rolling toward the edge and toward him, one arm slipping off the mattress to drape over his shoulder as she remained mostly asleep, moving on instinct and muscle memory. "Papa, I am a bad person," she mumbled. DABI went still. "Why would you think that?" "I used my quirk," she whispered, her voice shrinking into itself. "I was scared, and I didn't stop, and there was a girl, and I think I did something to her." "Shoo." DABI reached up and covered her hand, the one tangled in his hair, holding it gently. "We will talk about it later. For now you're safe, so just close your eyes and go back to sleep." "Papa." Are you mad at me?" DABI closed his eyes. "No, Eri. I am not mad at you, and I never will be for trying to protect yourself. Do you understand me? You did what you had to do." A brief pause, her breathing evening out again as sleep pulled her under. "I brought you something. Hawks gave me his autograph for you. Even drew a little feather next to your name and said you're the toughest kid in the city. Thank you. She took it and kept it aside. Eri didn't look as excited as DABI had expected her to be about the autograph. He let it go, because after the night she had endured, a scrap of paper with a feather meant nothing in a world she was too tired to stay awake for. Her grip on his hair loosened, her arms slackened over his shoulder, and her breathing deepened. She was asleep. DABI sat on the floor of Recovery Girl's office with his daughter's hand in his hair and his back against her bed, and he didn't move for a very long time. Across the room, Rumi watched him through her one good eye without speaking, because she did not need to, as she saw him sitting there shaking while holding a 4-year-old's hand and understood exactly what was going through his head, because it was the same thing in hers. After a while, DABI spoke without opening his eyes. Where are the ones who did this? They haven't gone anywhere. Rumi's voice was flat. Aizawa and the others intercepted them at the scene and took every one of them into custody, so it's already contained. Did you guys find out who's leading them? I am not completely sure yet, Rumi replied, brow furrowing slightly as she recalled it. They mentioned someone called 9, one with white hair, hooked up to a life support rig, and carrying multiple quirk signatures. The name 9 and the mention of multiple quirks rang a few bells in DABI's head. Rumi, what? Did you leave enough of him for me to have a conversation with? She didn't answer right away. I managed to not kill him, if that helps. No, that's enough. Also, there's something you need to know about Eri's quirk. When she used it, she rewound her completely, and now she's been reduced to a toddler, maybe 3 or 4 at most. DABI processed that, his mind racing through the mechanics of rewind. Where is she? I am not certain, but she's most likely with Aizawa right now. He looked back at Eri, his daughter, the girl who spent her nights sobbing about being a curse, who was terrified of her own quirk, turned a teenage assassin into a child to save her mother. From the doorway, a voice. You made it. Aizawa was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. His capture scarf was back in place, though the blonde girl was no longer tucked inside it. I tried to give you the full tactical brief on the phone, Aizawa said, his tone dry but lacking any real bite. But someone decided to launch themselves before I could finish a sentence. I heard enough. Aizawa took in the scene, DABI on the floor, Eri asleep, Rumi battered but unbowed. The students in Osaka, I just received my Jima's report on them, and all 3 are stable for now, Shota said, shifting his focus to the other situation he'd been managing. That's one less thing to worry about. Aizawa hesitated for a second. Endeavor showed up at the Osaka site. DABI's eyes opened. What? He was present during the Hosu engagement, and the moment he learned Shoto was involved, he commandeered a helicopter to Osaka. He's at the hospital now, waiting. DABI stared at the ceiling, processing the image of the number 2 hero dropping a national crisis to fly across the country for his son. 6 months ago, DABI would have called it a lie. Now, he wasn't sure what to call it. So many weird things happening at once was all he managed. We need to talk about the fallout, Aizawa pressed, stepping into the room. There are security protocols to review, an active investigation, and an HPSC inquiry into your flight path, along with Eri's quirk evaluation, the de-aged hostel, and the Medi. Tomorrow. DABI. I am exhausted. Whatever it is can wait until morning. Give me tonight, and I will deal with everything else then. But right now I am not going anywhere. Aizawa looked at them, let out a breath, pushed off the doorframe and turned to leave. Fine, Aizawa said. Tomorrow. He turned and left, closing the door behind him softly. The infirmary settled into a heavy, artificial silence. Hey, Rumi said. Come here and bring her with you. DABI opened his eyes, looked at Rumi, then at the small white-haired girl sleeping against his chest, and stood carefully to lift Eri from the bed without waking her. and when Rumi shifted to make space despite the bed being too small, he sat on the edge as she pulled him down beside her. He settled with his back against the raised portion of the bed, Eri curled against his chest, and Rumi pressed against his side with her bandaged arm draped over both of them. It was cramped and uncomfortable, and one of Rumi's 4 lines was digging into his shoulder, and Eri's horn was poking him in the chin, and nobody moved. Outside, the sun was coming up over UA campus. The emergency lights were off, but the courtyard remained destroyed, the apartment in ruins, and Cementos was going to be busy for weeks. But the grounds were quiet now, and the crisis was over. Inside Recovery Girl's office, a family slept. They slept badly, tangled together on a hospital bed that was too small, covered in bandages and plaster dust and the fading smell of blue fire. UA High School. Next morning, the 3 of them stayed together through the night, and when morning came, they had no choice but to return to their routines. Meanwhile, DABI, who had spent the entire night at UA, decided to visit his students. But first, gathered updates on the situation across all locations, confirming that everyone was safe except for Izuku Midoriya, Katsuki Bakugo, and Shoto Todoroki. After making sure Eri was settled and promising he would be back soon, he said his goodbyes and left. As for Himiko Toga, he chose to put that matter on hold. The situation around her was a mess, the kind that, if exposed, would trigger public outrage that UA might not be able to shield him from. And he was certain the Hero Public Safety Commission would not miss a chance to move against him. If they did, he almost welcomed it, because in his mind it would be an opportunity to make one thing clear. He was no longer someone they think they could control. DABI stood outside the hospital room where his 3 students were stationed, watching through the window as a very familiar and very annoying figure lectured them. Kenji Tsuragami, chief of the police force, stood at the foot of the hospital beds with his arms crossed. His beagle-like features were set in an expression of stern disapproval. Vigilantism is a serious offense, woof, he was saying, his verbal tick punctuating every other sentence. While your intentions may be considered admirable, you engaged in unauthorized hero activity without supervision or clearance. Woof. And as minors still undergoing training, this represents a substantial breach of. DABI pushed open the door. Chief Tsuragami, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I am confident my students understand the seriousness of their actions. So perhaps this discussion can continue once they are no longer recovering from injuries that nearly killed them. Kenji turned to face him, and his expression shifted to something between exasperation and resignation. Ah, Blue Sun, he replied with a long sigh, ears twitching slightly. Like teacher, like students, woof. DABI raised an eyebrow. Excuse me, the water hose incident, woof. You were only hours away from your graduation ceremony when you chose to engage an A-rank villain without authorization. Woof. And fast forward years, I am still dealing with the paperwork your student created. You've got a long memory, Chief, DABI pointed out. Is that meant to be an insult? That depends. Do you want to take it that way? The 3 students had been watching this exchange with varying expressions. Midoriya looked guilty. Todoroki appeared contemplative, while Bakugo just looked annoyed at being lectured while immobilized. DABI shifted his attention back to Kenji. And for the record, this situation isn't comparable to mine. So let's not conflate the two, because my students were responding to an active kidnapping involving one of their own. Also, they alerted a licensed hero, me, before engaging. They maintained a defensive position to facilitate civilian evacuation instead of pursuing combat, and they prevented casualties that would have occurred if they had waited for official response protocols. All of which is why they're not being charged with vigilantism, woof, Kenji acknowledged. But it doesn't change the fact that they put themselves in enormous danger, that nearly killed them, woof. I am aware. DABI's tone made it clear that particular fact was currently his main concern. Is there anything else, Chief? Because my students need rest, and I have a press conference to attend. Kenji studied him for a long moment, then sighed again. Just try to instill some sense of self-preservation in them, woof. The hero world needs people willing to take risks, yes. But it also needs those people to survive long enough to actually become heroes, woof. Working on it. I am sure you are, woof. Kenji headed for the door, pausing beside DABI. For what it's worth, what they did was brave, woof. He left and DABI turned to face his students, and his expression was complicated. Before you say anything, Bakugo started. I am not angry, DABI interrupted. Well, I am, but not for the reasons you think. He walked closer to the beds. The problem is that you three nearly died. I am not going to tell you what you did was wrong, DABI continued, because it wasn't, but I am going to make damn sure you're strong enough that next time, and there will be a next time you can handle it without destroying yourselves in the process. A knock at the door interrupted whatever response the students might have given. The rest of Class 1A poured in, carrying balloons, cards, flowers, and various get-well gifts. Midoriya. Uraraka rushed to his bedside. We heard what happened. Are you okay? Bakugo, your hands. Kirishima looked genuinely distressed. Man, that's so unmanly. I mean, it's not unmanly that you got hurt, but you know what I mean. I don't know what you mean, shitty hair, Bakugo growled. Todoroki was receiving similar attention from his classmates, with Yaoyorozu looking particularly worried and Ida delivering a characteristic lecture about following proper procedures. Koda stood slightly apart from the group, looking guilty and miserable despite the well wishes his classmates had given him. Koda, DABI addressed him directly. Come here for a moment. The boy approached nervously. You handled yourself well under pressure, DABI continued. Using your quirk to call for help, relaying precise location data through your birds, and trusting your classmates to act on it. That's exactly what effective crisis response looks like. But if I hadn't been captured, Koda started. Those Nomu would have been deployed without any warning, and the casualties would have been far worse. DABI's expression softened slightly. So don't overthink this and start blaming yourself, because what happened wasn't your fault. Do you understand me? Koda nodded, looking slightly less miserable. The door opened again, and this time Aizawa entered, looking even more exhausted than usual. Visiting hours are nearly over, he announced. Wrap things up and say your goodbyes. The students began to file out, still chattering about the attack and recovery and everything else. But Aizawa remained, along with DABI. Once the room was clear except for the 3 injured students, Aizawa spoke. As the end of the term approaches, you will all be sitting for exams, including written tests that cover everything you have learned over the semester. When exactly? Midoriya started, already tense despite the bandages. After you are discharged and cleared for light activity, which, according to the reports, will take roughly 3 weeks. Aizawa cut in without pause. 3 weeks. Bakugo's voice rose. You expect me to stay stuck in this hospital for that long? You don't have a choice, Aizawa replied evenly, unmoved. Your hands require proper recovery time, even with assistance, and you're not risking permanent damage because you're impatient. He let that settle for a beat before continuing. And that's only part of it, because there will also be a practical component to the exam. The 3 of them exchanged looks, the shift in tone drawing their focus. What kind of practical exam are we talking about? Todoroki asked, his voice calm but intent. You will be briefed when the time comes, so for now your only priority is recovery. Aizawa replied, cutting off any further questions before they could form. He paused at the door, his expression unreadable for a moment. For what it's worth, the 3 of you held the line when it mattered, and that's not something I take lightly. It takes real heroism to do what you did, But if you ever put yourselves in that level of danger again without exhausting every other option first, I will personally ensure your next year at UA is something you will regret on a daily basis. Yes, Sensei, all three answered in unison. Aizawa gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning away, and without another word, both he and DABI stepped out, leaving the room to settle in their absence. After staying 3 days in the hospital, they had been moved from the ICU to a general ward during that time. It was late at night. Bakugo was fast asleep, and so was Todoroki. However, even though Midoriya did seem like he was sleeping, his body was sweating, as if he were running a marathon. His face was tight, his breathing uneven, his fingers twitching against the hospital sheets. The discomfort was visible even from across the room. Small movements, micro-flinches, the look of someone whose body was asleep but whose mind was somewhere else entirely. Izuku Midoriya was somewhere else. The space had no floor, ceiling, or walls, just a vast, formless darkness stretching in every direction, less like emptiness and more like being inside something. A dense green mist covered him from the chest down, clinging like water and obscuring everything below, while the same substance pressed over his mouth, stealing his voice. Beside him, a woman stood. She was beautiful, clear, and sharply defined, more so than anything else in that space, as if proximity here was measured by something other than distance. Beyond her, others stood in a line stretching into the dark. Their forms faded the farther they went, features blurring and dissolving until the last was nothing but a faint silhouette of golden light, the outline of a man barely holding shape. Midoriya's chest tightened. He had experienced something similar before. During the sports festival, when Shinso's brainwashing quirk had caught him and pulled him under. These were the same people. But unlike before, he was the one who entered their space. Are they the vestiges of one for all? That was the only conclusion Midoriya had reached. There were a total of 7 figures, representing 7 previous holders. He is the 9th inheritor. Foosh! Then all at once they vanished. Every figure, every outline, every trace of the people who had carried this power before him gone. The dark swallowed them, and Midoriya was alone in the formless space with the green mist clinging to his body again. Come with me. A voice? Midoriya turned. 2 new figures had appeared in the dark. He was sure they hadn't been there a moment ago and materialized only now, as if the space had decided to show him something different. One stood tall. Blue shirt, blue pants, a lean frame, and a posture that radiated command. And, in front of him, kneeling, was another person, a bit smaller, thinner, and head bowed. The tall one spoke. Dear foolish little brother. Midoriya's eyes went wide. He recognized that voice. He had never heard it in person, but somehow he could. All for one. Why do you resist? The kneeling figure didn't look up. His fists were clenched on his knees, and they were arguing. The details were fragmentary, the words coming through in pieces like a radio signal fading in and out, but the shape of the conversation was clear. All for one was offering something to his younger brother, who was rejecting it. The same exchange continued over and over, 2 brothers locked in a cycle of demand and defiance that had apparently been going on for a very long time. Is he the first user? Midoriya thought. He looked at the brother who was still kneeling. Is he the person who started One for All? Neither of them seemed to notice him. The scene was playing out like a recording, being projected into the space for him to witness. The past, unfolding in front of him like pages turning in a book he couldn't touch. Then things moved. The younger brother refused again. Something final in it this time. A line drawn, a door closed, a decision made that couldn't be unmade. All for one's posture changed. The casual authority sharpened into something colder. And then Midoriya understood as he watched it happen. All for one raised his hand as the power flowed from one brother to the other. The power that would become One for All was forced into a body that already held a small, unknown quirk, one that allowed the transfer of quirks. When his brother, All for One, added a stockpiling quirk on top of it, the two merged, birthing One for All. Stop! The first user screamed. His body convulsed, back arching, hands clawing at empty air as searing pain tore through him, deep and fundamental, like his very cells were being rewritten. Stop! Please! Midoriya reached out, trying to move toward him, to help, to do anything, but suddenly everything disappeared again. The darkness and the screaming were gone in an instant, leaving only the same formless void and silence. Then the voice returned, a bit different and definitely not All for One, but the first user. So you're the ninth. Midoriya still couldn't speak as the mist was still covering his mouth, but he could listen. This is happening sooner than I anticipated, and you're developing at a pace I didn't account for, and the connection between us is forming far faster than it should. A pause. The voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Urgency, maybe, or concern. But it still isn't enough, and I had intended to show you far more. There's so much you still need to understand, but you're barely operating at 30% of your capacity, and if you don't reach the level required, your body won't be able to withstand what's coming. A shape emerged from the dark, a hand reaching toward him. The outline of the first user, closer now, his face almost visible. Be careful, because the singularity point, the moment when One for All becomes greater than the sum of its parts, was crossed long before it ever reached you. And what you carry now is no longer the same power I held, nor what any of us before you held. It has evolved into something else entirely. The hand got closer, almost touching. But you will be fine. The voice softened. You're not alone. Midoriya reached for the hand, but everything shattered. The window of the hospital room exploded outward. Glass blew out into the night in a shower of fragments, the frame cracking, and the wall around it spiderwebbing with fracture lines. The sound was enormous in the quiet ward. A sharp, percussive bang followed by the tinkling rain of glass hitting the ground 3 stories below. Bakugo was upright in half a second, covers thrown aside, bandaged hands raised, eyes sharp and searching, every combat instinct firing despite the hospital gown and fingers that would not close. What the? Who's there? He was scanning the room, window, and door. Is it a break-in? Which bastard? I will blow your face off. Todoroki sat up with calm, blinking once as he took in the shattered window, Bakugo shouting, and Midoriya. Midoriya was sitting upright in his bed, gasping. His chest was heaving. His hospital gown was soaked through with sweat, and his right arm, the one that wasn't fully casted, was crackling. Green energy arced across his skin, flickering and surging, One for All discharging in uncontrolled bursts that made the air around his hand shimmer. The heart monitor beside his bed was going haywire. He grabbed his own wrist with his casted hand and forced himself to breathe, total concentration breathing. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. The green energy flickered, sputtered, and slowly died down. His hands stopped crackling and the monitor settled. DKU. Bakugo had located the source of the disturbance and was now redirecting all of his rage accordingly. Did you just blow out the window? In your sleep? Are you kidding me right now? Bakugo. Todoroki's voice cut through cleanly. I think you should calm down. Don't tell me to. He obviously didn't do it on purpose. Look at him. Todoroki nodded toward Midoriya, who was still gripping his own wrist, still breathing hard. His quirk discharged while he was unconscious. It's something that can happen under strain. Bakugo whipped toward him. Do you even hear yourself? That makes it worse. Because this idiot can't even keep his quirk under control while he's asleep. So what do you think happens if mine goes off the same way, huh? Because I would end up blowing this entire hospital sky high and we would all be dead. And honestly, at this point, I wouldn't even mind if it meant I didn't have to spend another second stuck in this room with you 2 idiots. While Bakugo continued venting 3 days of accumulated hospital frustration onto a target that couldn't fight back, Todoroki got out of bed. Slowly, carefully. His ribs were still healing and his lung wasn't fully recovered. He crossed to Midoriya's bed and sat on the edge. The door banged open. 2 nurses from the night shift rushed in, already talking over each other, drawn by the sound of shattering glass and Bakugo's continued shouting. "What happened? Is everyone?" Bakugo pointed accusingly at Midoriya with a bandaged hand. "Get me a different room. I am done. I am leaving. I will walk out of here on my hands if I have to." "Sir, please, you can't. Don't tell me what I can't." Todoroki looked at the nurses. He discharged his quirk unconsciously during a dream, but no one has been injured, he said, pausing briefly before adding, "Although the window will need replacing." One of the nurses followed his gaze to the shattered glass, then to Midoriya, who was still shaking and gripping his wrist as he tried to steady himself, and finally to Bakugo. It was going to be a very long night shift. The 3 of them, Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki, had been in the hospital long enough for the novelty of visitors to wear off completely. First it was fine. DABI, Aizawa, and All Might came by on the first day. Then each of their individual families, and their classmates, who also visited them almost daily. By day 3, Bakugo was done. When the door handle clicked downward, he didn't even wait for the person to appear. "Oh, come on." Bakugo bolted upright, his bandaged hands rising in clumsy, locked fists. "I am sick of this. Which bastard is it now? I swear if it's Dunce's face again with another get-well card, I am gonna shove it down his—" He choked on the rest of his threat. Standing in the doorway were the Todoroki siblings. Fuyumi was carrying a large cloth-wrapped package, and Natsuo was behind her, looking like he was dragged. Bakugo's eyes moved to the package in Fuyumi's arms. He remembered what she had brought last time. Homemade onigiri, tamagoyaki, pickled vegetables, and a carriage that was, and he would never say this out loud to another living person, some of the best he has ever had. He silently settled back against his pillows and said nothing. A smaller figure appeared from behind Fuyumi's legs. White hair, red eyes, and a little horn barely visible under her bangs. It was Eri, who peeked around the doorframe at the 3 bedridden students, one hand gripping the hem of Fuyumi's skirt. "Hello," she said. Her voice was small, and she pulled back slightly behind Fuyumi when Bakugo's shouting from a moment ago registered. Midoriya's face lit up immediately. "Hey, Eri. It's great to see you." He tried to wave and remembered both his arms were in casts. He settled for smiling so hard it probably hurt his face. "And Fuyumi, Natsuo. Thanks for coming again." "Really?" Fuyumi smiled, warm and practiced. The smile of someone who had spent her entire life smoothing over difficult rooms. She nudged Natsuo with a sharp elbow. He looked at the ceiling, then at her, and finally at the 3 boys. "Hey," Natsuo said. Fuyumi nudged him harder. "Hope you guys are actually, healing or whatever," he added with the enthusiasm of a man reading a hostage note. "I hope we're not interrupting your recovery," Fuyumi said, setting the bundle on the side table. "I know you've been inundated with visitors." No, not at all." Midoriya's head shook so fast his hair blurred. "We should be the ones apologizing. All the trouble we caused, making everyone worry, and you keep coming all the way out here with food and—" "Midoriya." Todoroki's voice came from the 3rd bed, flat and even. "You should stop apologizing for everything. That will only make the other person uncomfortable. Right? Sorry. Not sorry. The reason Eri was with the Todoroki siblings and not with Dabi or Rumi was a story in itself. Earlier that afternoon, Fuyumi and Natsuo had gone for a routine visit to see their mother, Rei, in her rehabilitation wing. A routine visit, or it would have been, except when they arrived on Ray's floor, they found someone already there. DABI was standing in the corridor outside Ray's room. He wasn't inside, just standing there, looking at the door, with the expression of a man who had walked to the edge of something and stopped. Eri was inside the room, sitting on the bed next to Ray. They were talking. Ray was brushing Eri's hair with a comb from the bedside table, and Eri was chattering about something. Her drawings, or Rumi, or the cat she had seen on the way here. And Ray was listening with the kind of gentle, focused attention that made Eri gravitate toward her every time they met. The beautiful lady. That's what Eri called her. She had mentioned her to DABI a few times. The beautiful lady at the hospital with the soft voice and the white hair like mine, Papa, and each time she said it, DABI's face would do something he would quickly cover up. Fuyumi and Natsuo had caught him red-handed. DABI didn't try to turn to them or greet them when they came face to face. However, Natsuo froze, his eyes narrowing as he took in his older brother's defensive posture. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice echoing a bit too loudly for the quiet ward. "Natsuo, behave," Fuyumi hissed. She turned to DABI, her expression a mix of sympathy and the exhausted patience of the family peacemaker. "I am sorry, he is just surprised." DABI didn't look at Natsuo. He didn't even look at Fuyumi. His gaze was fixed on the floor, tracking the faint sound of Ray's laughter bleeding through the heavy wooden door. "The kid wanted to see her," DABI said. "HM. Thanks for bringing her," Fuyumi replied softly. "MM. A short, non-committal nod was all he gave. Fuyumi lingered, her gaze darting between the door and her brother beside it. "But, do you really not want to meet her? Just for a moment?" "Fuyumi, do you actually want me to?" he questioned sarcastically. The question hit like a physical weight. Fuyumi opened her mouth to speak, but the words died in her throat. Even Natsuo's bravado faltered, his expression softening into something uncharacteristically grim. "Well, there you have it," DABI added. "Mother is finally recovering, Fuyumi. The doctors say she is making progress for the first time in a decade. If I walk through that door, if she sees a dead son standing in her room while she is trying to find a reason to be whole again." He let out a short, dry huff of a laugh that held no humor. "I am the ultimate trigger, Fuyumi. I am the worst thing that ever happened to her heart. I can handle being dead for the rest of my life if that's the price for her sanity. What I won't do is be the reason she regresses just because I was selfish enough to want to be seen." The silence that followed was heavy, an understandable weight shared by all three siblings. They all knew the fragility of Ray's mind. They all knew that for their mother, DABI wasn't just a brother or a hero. He was the scar that wouldn't close. "So," DABI said, straightening his jacket and regaining his mask, "I stay on this side of the woods. Eri gets her beautiful lady, and Mom gets to keep her peace. Nobody gets hurt that way." Fuyumi reached out, her hand hovering near his arm before she pulled it back. "You could at least sit in the chair, Toya. You don't have to stand guard like a gargoyle." "I like the view of the exit," DABI replied, his eyes drifting back to the door. "Now go in. Eri's probably run out of stories by now." "It's always about her, huh?" Natsuo muttered, though the bite was gone from his tone. "What else is there?" DABI countered simply. By the time the visiting hours ticked to a close and the siblings emerged, the brief spark in Eri's eyes had gained from meeting his mother had already begun to dim. In actuality, it was the real reason DABI visited her. Since the incident, Eri became quieter and subdued, and the problem was that she wasn't venting either. It was like someone had turned the brightness down on her, and for a new couple unaware of how children are handled, it felt pressurizing. Even when they were tried, she would not talk about what was wrong, falling quiet at odd moments to stare at her hands, and when asked, she would say nothing in a voice that meant everything. DABI figured it was the attack, what she had done with her quirk and seen that day. Bad people had come into her home while she was sleeping, and the world she had been told was safe had turned out to be unsafe. And the child is unable to let that thought go. That's when Fuyumi had offered to take her to see Shoto and the others. DABI had hesitated after what happened at the apartment. Letting Eri out of his sight is surely not an option. But Rumi had volunteered to go along. She was right outside the hospital room door right now, leaning against the wall casually. So here they were. After the initial greetings, the room settled into an awkward quietness. 5 people in a hospital room, 3 of them bedridden, 1 of them 4 years old and not talking, and 2 visitors who weren't sure how much to push the conversation. Fuyumi tried to ask Midoriya about his physical therapy schedule. Midoriya answered in too much detail because he always over-explained when he was nervous and then asked Natsuo about university, and Natsuo gave a one-word answer, and the conversation died again. Eri was sitting in a chair between Midoriya's and Todoroki's beds. Her legs are dangling above the floor. She is not swinging them. She was usually a leg swinger. The fact that her feet were still was the clearest sign that something was wrong. Everyone in the room knew about the attack on the UA faculty area, which had happened the same night as the Nomu incident. They are also aware that Eri had been the target and that Rumi suffered injuries during the fight. But they were unaware of Toga's transformation. That information was locked down tight among DABI, Rumi, Aizawa, Vlad King, Recovery Girl, and Nizu. Nobody else needed to know that a 4-year-old girl had rewound a teenage villain into a toddler. That fact should not circulate through the student body or the media. But they could all see that Eri wasn't okay, and none of them knew what to do about it. The silence stretched, then Bakugo's stomach growled. His face went red. "Kaken, are you hung?" Midoriya started. "Who the hell is what?" Bakugo's voice cracked up to a volume that made Fuyumi flinch. "That wasn't me. I don't know what you heard, but it wasn't. I am not." "Shut up, DKU. I didn't say anything yet. You were going to." From the third bed, Todoroki's voice came out with his usual flat, unhurried delivery. "It wasn't you? That's strange. I definitely heard something." He paused, looking at the ceiling like he was genuinely puzzled. "My mistake, then. Sorry about that." Bakugo's head whipped toward him. "Oi, was that sarcasm? Are you being sarcastic right now, you half-and-half bastard? Because it sure as hell sounded like I was apologizing. I don't see how an apology can be sarcastic. Everything you say sounds sarcastic. You've got that dead face and that flat voice and you do it on purpose. I don't know what you mean. See, right there. You're doing it right now." Midoriya was waving his casted arms in a way that was probably supposed to be calming and looked more like a bird trying to take off with broken wings. "Kaken, please. The doctor said you need to stay calm or the stitches in your hands." "Don't tell me about my hands, DKU. I'll show you calm. A sound stopped all 3 of them. Small, bright, and unmistakable. Eri was laughing. It was not a big laugh, just the kind that slips out before you can catch it. A giggle that broke through whatever she had been holding down for the past several days. Her hand covered her mouth, her red eyes crinkling at the corners, her feet swinging again. The room went quiet. Midoriya and Shoto looked at her, and so did Bakugo, but he immediately looked away. Natsuo was staring at the little girl. Fuyumi had both hands pressed together in front of her chest, her eyes bright. Nobody said anything for a moment. They just let it be there. The small, clear sound of a little girl laughing in a hospital room, after days of silence, because 3 idiots couldn't stop arguing even when they were held together with stitches and plaster casts. Fuyumi moved first. She clapped her hands together, seizing the moment before it could slip away. "Well, who's hungry? Because I definitely am, and I brought way too much food for just us." "Me. I want some, please," Midoriya said immediately, because Midoriya would agree to anything that kept the mood from dropping back down. Bakugo's eyes slid to the cloth-wrapped package on the side table. He stared at it for a long, stubborn second. "Whatever," he said. "Since you brought it all the way here, I guess it would be a waste not to." Fuyumi was already unwrapping it, pulling out containers, and Natsuo was helping her set things up on the wheeled tray table. Eri had slid off her chair and was standing on her toes to see what was inside. Midoriya was trying to figure out how to hold chopsticks with casted hands, and Todoroki was watching all of it with the faintest trace of a smile. A small, messy, improvised lunch, 6 people in a hospital room, eating food that was still warm because Fuyumi had wrapped it in 3 layers of towels, talking over each other, arguing about who got the last piece of carriage. Bakugo got it, nobody challenged him on it. Eri got the second to last piece, handed to her by Fuyumi, and she ate it sitting cross-legged on the floor between the beds with her cheeks puffed out like a chipmunk. She was smiling. As they kept eating, the conversation drifted into light, random territory. Fuyumi finally asked, "Eri, honey, did something happen to make you sad?" The room went dead silent. The 5 older boys collectively held their breath and had a single thought. Isn't that too straightforward and kind of putting her in a spot? Even Bakugo seemed to understand this basic principle of human interaction, which was saying something. But Eri did not shut down or retreat. Something about the directness of the question, no careful phrasing, just a blunt and honest ask from someone who did not know how to soften it, cracked something open, and her small hands curled into fists on her knees. I caused trouble." Her voice was quiet as she chose each word carefully, turning it over before letting it out. "For Mama and Papa, and not just a little, but something really big. Something really, really big." She ducked her head, struggling to describe the shape of a catastrophe she had been told to keep secret. It was something far too complex for a 4-year-old to express. Everyone in the room understood what she was talking about. They had all been warned too to keep the details of the UA attack under a total blackout. It was understandable, as if that got out to the media, the public, or anyone, the fallout would be enormous, since it was the second time in such a short period of time. And it keeps happening. Eri continued, her voice trembling. "Bad things happen because I am there. It's always because of me." She took a shaky, hiccuping breath. Especially my horn. I wish it would go away. I wish I didn't have it." She was not crying, her eyes red and wet, but she held it in. However, the uncertainty she is facing is obvious. Fuyumi moved first. She was on the floor beside Eri, pulling her into a tight embrace. Hey, look at me," Fuyumi said, her voice steady even as she squeezed the girl tight. "Why are you carrying a grown-up's worry? You're so little, Eri. Right now, your only job is to play, eat yummy things, and be a little silly. That's it. You aren't meant for anything else yet." She pulled back and looked at Eri's face directly, eye to eye. She pulled back, looking Eri straight in the eye. "Did Mama or Papa ever say you were a bother? Did they tell you that you made a mess?" No, they would never." Eri shook her head so hard her hair flew. "They're too nice." "Good, because if they did, I'd walk over and have a loud talk about how precious you are. You remember that." Eri rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand, her face scrunching up in a way that looked half resentful and half heartbroken. "But that's why it's hard," she burst out, her voice rising with a frustrated edge. "They're too nice. They never get mad at me. Even when I do something scary, they just hug me and say, 'It's okay, Eri.' I didn't want to tell them I was sad because I knew they'd just be gentle and say it wasn't my fault. But it is my fault, and I just want." She ran out of air, her shoulders slumping as her gaze fell back to the floor. "I don't know. I just want it to be different." Fuyumi and Natsuo exchanged a helpless glance. How do you argue with a child who is upset by the very unconditional nature of her parents' love? Midoriya's eyes were glistening. his lip trembling the way it did right before he cried. Bakugo looked at the ceiling. "Kids these days are so damn soft," he muttered, "getting all worked up over nothing. Just eat your food and stop overthinking every little." Before he could finish, Shoto cut in. "Eri." His voice was even and unhurried, the same flat tone as always, but something underneath it had shifted. "You have good parents, and I want you to understand that I mean that." Eri looked up at him, searching his face. "I am glad they're that kind to you." He held her gaze. "Because you deserve parents who treat you that way." He meant every word, and so did the Todoroki siblings. Beneath everything that had happened in the past month, they are always proud of how their brother turned out, despite all the sufferings he himself has faced. He even became such a capable father, whose only fault was an excess of gentleness. Shoto looked down at his own left hand, turning it slowly, palm up. "You said you hate your power." Eri's eyes fixed on it, wide and unmoving. "I hated mine too, my fire." He continued, his gaze steady as he watched her take it in. "For a long time I refused to use it. I hated where it came from. I hated what it reminded me of. Every time I felt that heat, I just wanted to throw it away." The butterfly pulsed softly, its wings beating in a slow, controlled rhythm. "But I eventually figured something out," he said, lifting his eyes back to hers. "It doesn't matter how you got it or whose blood gave it to you. It doesn't even matter what people say it's meant for. The only thing that stays real is what you decide to do with it." He paused, letting that settle. "So, what do you want to do with yours? Do you want to help people, or do you want to hurt them?" "I want to help," she whispered instantly. The words were firm, even if her voice was small. "But all I did was..." "Then you just have to learn to control it," Shoto said, closing his hand and snuffing the flame into nothing. "Intentions are just the start. What defines you are the chives you make moving forward. And Eri, you're still so young, which means you have time, and more importantly, you have people around you who will help you learn how to use it the right way." The room fell quiet. Probably, no one expected that from Shoto Todoroki, the boy known for flat tones. But it made sense. It was his life. He was the boy who had spent years as a half measure because the other half felt like a surrender to his father and understood the desire to cut a part of yourself out because it felt poisoned. Of course, he understood a little girl who wished her quirk did not exist. He had been her, just taller, colder, and far worse at saying it out loud. Bakugo stared at the wall, his jaw tight, his ruined hands resting on the blanket in front of him. Intentions did not matter, only actions. He thought about his hands, about what he had done with them in that facility, the things he had shouted while doing it, the words murder and kill leaving his mouth like punctuation, like empty sounds that meant nothing. He thought about stains standing inches from his face, asking if he meant it. About the orphanage behind the wall and the moment it actually mattered, when actions counted and intentions meant nothing, and he had stepped forward without hesitation, putting himself between those kids and the thing trying to kill them. He hated himself for something he could not name. He was proud of himself for something else he could not name, and the two feelings sat on top of each other, neither willing to move. "This is annoying," Bakugo muttered under his breath, unheard, and he did not repeat it. Izuku Midoriya wiped his eyes against his shoulder, the only part of his upper body not in a cast. For him, Shoto's words landed differently. Ever since that dream, something had been sitting at the back of his mind. His quirk, One for All, had been passed down, originally given to its first user by All for One. That truth had shaken him, but now it was clear how wrong he had been. The origin of a power did not matter. What mattered was how the person chose to use it. "Eri, it's like this," Izuku started, his voice thick as he tried to keep his composure. Think of a kitchen knife. If a chef has it, they use it to make a yummy meal to feed people. But if someone mean has it, they use it to hurt. The knife isn't the one being mean or nice. It's just a tool, and the person holding it makes the choice. He nodded, giving her a determined smile. Your quirk is just like that. It isn't a bad power or a good power. It's just your power. And because you're a good person, I know that when you're ready, you're going to use it to help so many people. More than you can even imagine. Eri looked at him for a moment, then shifted her gaze to Todoroki, and finally to Bakugo, who was staring very intently at the wall as if none of this concerned him. She looked back down at her hands, opening and closing them without a word. Fuyumi and Natsuo watched from the side, Fuyumi's hands clasped near her chest, her smile carrying that quiet, complicated pride of an older sister watching a room full of broken teenagers choose kindness on their own. Natsuo looked at Eri, then reached out slowly, carefully, making sure she saw it coming, and rested his hand lightly on her head, rubbing her hair once before pulling back. Eri looked up at him without flinching or pulling away. Natsuo gave her a small nod, nothing more, and somehow that was enough. While Rumi and Eri are at the hospital, DABI just got a text from her, informing them they are coming back to UA, as they finished their visit to the hospital. On the other hand, DABI was already deep in assisting Aizawa with the paperwork, who had been nagging him from the morning. Just like that, for more than 4 hours, DABI was reviewing the reports of Class 1A's workplace sent by the pro-heroes they are under. I should just resign, he thought, leaning back in his chair. True, experiencing firsthand how the plot has changed due to his intervention. For DABI, staying here, playing teacher and filing reports, felt like a waste of time he didn't have. And he also needs to get stronger. Genetic milestone system, 3 evolution paths, breath of the sun, 100 out of 100%. Super soldier, 100 out of 100%. Arachnid genome, error 30 to 34, out of 100%. Lifespan left, 120 plus years, 34%. He noted. However, the decision is certainly that Rumi wouldn't favor either logically and financially. Also, he is aware that he can't be reckless like he had been growing up. He has a family he wants to spend the rest of his life with. Besides, the paycheck for a UA assistant teacher is really well-deserved to be tempted to stay. How things change. He chuckled, remembering not long ago how he had thought his financial situation was comfortable. But still no one rejects extra payment. Obviously and undoubtedly, before any materialistic satisfaction, he is certainly angry with UA, security, and Nizu had personally apologized to him, expressing their failure to react faster. But it was understandable since most of the teachers were busy contacting the pro-heroes, the UA. Students are under prioritizing their safety first. Nevertheless, he shouldn't be too disappointed even if he can't resign. Maybe I'll just use that guilt to negotiate a raise, he mused. He still had high hopes for his retirement plan. Soon after, Rumi and Eri are back as reported. Immediately, DABI left the stack of reports on the desk to meet them in the temporary faculty housing Cementos had built for them, while the apartment was being rebuilt. Inside, the space was functional but sterile, yet it was currently occupied by a sight that made DABI's head throb. On the floor, Eri was sitting cross-legged, her brightness seemingly returning as she focused on the small blonde girl sitting across from her. Toga, or whatever Toga was now. She looked to be about 3 or 4 years old now, her golden eyes wide and vacant of the madness that had once defined her. Honestly, the current situation with Himiko Toga is way more complicated than the minimum attention DABI had been giving. When Eri's rewind triggered, it didn't just revert Toga's body to her childhood. Eri's quirk operates on a quantum biological level. However, the real problem is to see when she actually wakes up. Toga was in a coma for nearly a week, which was a reasonable shutdown her body did to protect itself, and another 2 days just learning how to move her new, tiny limbs. During all this time, she had been provided extensive care, considering every possible precaution to make sure she was okay. Eri's quirk rewinds the body, but it cannot reverse the consciousness trapped in the transition. Toga's adult memories, the bloodlust and trauma, remained etched into a brain that no longer held the same capacity or hormonal stability to handle them. And this is precisely where the problem lies. Her tiny, undeveloped nervous system is currently under a metal strain of memories, experiences, and the past that can be proved lethal when she wakes up. If the public ever found out that an incident of such disturbance happened in the UA, the outrage over Eri's quirk would be too high for even Principal Nizu to defend her. And obviously, HPSC won't slide into a favored situation to get back at DABI. But that is something he can handle. He never cared about his public image or what HPSC might do to him, and obviously they are not stupid enough to mess with his family. However, what actually hurt him was the weight of his own failure. DABI had been very successful in his recruitment for the past years. He had hunted down the fractured souls of the underworld, Spinner, Twice, and Magna, and forged them into the vanguard of a new hero society. But Himiko Toga had been his one consistent failure. Unlike the others on his team, whose criminal records made them easy to trace, she was different. A girl the same age as the protagonist who had lived a normal life until middle school, leaving almost no trail to follow. From what he had gathered, her parents despised her quirk and may have misreported or disguised it, further obscuring the truth. And not to mention, Toga's ability to become anyone allowed her to vanish into the mundane. And then there was the quirk itself. The ability to become anyone let her disappear into the ordinary. Whereas Twice was trapped in his own loop and Spinner stood out as a target, she existed in the seams of society. 1 week a schoolgirl, the next a salaryman, always someone else. Still, he should have not given up. If only he had known things would turn out like this, he would have turned the whole country upside down to find her. TSK. Need to get it right every damn time, and even one failure is non-negotiable. Oblivious to DABI's complicated thoughts, Eri had both hands on the girl's cheeks and was squishing them together. Papa, look at her face. Eri was completely absorbed. She squeezed the cheeks again. The blonde girl's lips puckered out like a fish. She's so cute, and her cheeks are so soft and squishy. They're just like mochi. Toga didn't snap or snarl. She just blinked, staring at Eri with a hollow, golden curiosity, while DABI leaned against the doorframe and wondered how his retirement plan had turned into a literal daycare for the damned. Rumi came from inside, carrying 2 bento boxes and a juice carton. All right, that's enough. It's lunchtime. Let's go, kiddos. Eri perked up immediately, releasing the blonde girl's face and scrambling toward the table. The other girl watched her go, then looked at the food, and something in her posture shifted. A tiny forward lean, a slight widening of the eyes. She was hungry, but the reaction was muted, held back, like she had already learned at some point in her short new life that showing too much of what you wanted was a mistake. DABI watched that and filed whatever thoughts he was having. Okay, fine. Whatever happens, happens. Rumi set the bentos down and shot him a look. What are you even talking about? Isn't this obvious from the start? I am just saying I am on board, he replied, a touch defensive now. We're doing this. Well, I guess I am glad you finally caught up and got on board with it. DABI looked at her. Honestly, he was surprised how Rumi accepted the situation. From what she reported during the fight, Rumi was the most angered, and Toga had been the primary target. He could literally imagine her kicking the high school girl's skull to death if something were to happen to Eri. However, he also kinda understood what was going on inside her right now, or at least he had a rough map of it. Rumi was blaming herself. She had done everything right, given everything she had, and somehow she had still let the villains get their hands on Eri. That was eating her alive, even though she did not say it out loud. And then there was the other thing. That morning, Naomasa Tsukachi, the detective DABI had worked with before, the one with the lie detection quirk. He came with a file on Himiko Toga's detailed history. Rumi had read it, only to learn how the cheerful, well-mannered girl succumbed to society, while her parents called her rotten to the core and labeled her as inhuman. Transform. Her quirk allows her to take on the perfect physical appearance, including voice, of anyone whose blood she ingests. The quirk is undoubtedly not a heroic one, and if not taken care of, it can promote a natural inclination towards blood. It was a tough situation. A kid whose quirk made her want blood the way other kids wanted affection, and instead of anyone helping her understand that, they had told her she was broken. She was labeled inhuman, a monster wearing a girl's face. All the while she was just lonely, leaving no choice but to learn to hide her real feelings behind a smile. In the end, what had happened to her was miserable. She eventually succumbed to quirk's influence and attacked another student, Saito, who was bloodied and bruised from a fight, believing her feelings for him were a crush. For Rumi, who had spent her entire life being precisely who she was, loudly, violently, without apology, in a society that mostly tolerated it because she was strong enough to make tolerance the easier option. And reading about a child who had been crushed for the crime of being born different had landed somewhere deep and personal. This wasn't charity or guilt, but Rumi deciding she was going to fix something that she didn't break, and God help anyone who tried to talk her out of it. DABI leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Okay," he said. "We will do it your way." She looked up at him. For a second, the armor came down and her expression was raw. Then it was back. "Obviously my way. When has your way ever been the better option?" "I am choosing not to answer that." So Toga was staying. The decision had been ratified, signed, and delivered before DABI had even walked through the door, which was exactly how things worked in this house. But there were things he was uncertain about. The rewind. Eri's quirk had taken Toga back to her toddler years. Physically, mentally, everything. From what he had observed over the last day and a half, the girl had no memory of her life after childhood, and probably before she awakened her quirk. She neither recognized faces or the names she knew after a certain point. She was, by every measure DABI could apply, a normal child. And DABI was confident he wasn't being fooled. He had spent years reading people in the underground, where the ability to tell when someone was performing and when they were genuine was the difference between going home and going into a ditch. This girl wasn't acting or hiding. She was just a kid. But would that hold? He couldn't rule out the possibility of memories resurfacing. Quirk factors didn't just disappear, and the blood-related quirk was still in there somewhere, dormant, waiting to manifest. DABI wasn't worried about the quirk itself. A quirk was a tool, it was neutral. With proper guidance, the kind Toga had never gotten the first time around, she could learn to live with it, and use it without it consuming her. What worried him was everything else. The variables he couldn't control, the things that might trigger a relapse or a memory cascade or a personality shift that nobody saw coming. But in the end, he let all of it go. Because honestly, Toga's situation hit a nerve he didn't like admitting existed. As he mentioned, she was one of the people he had wanted to change, but he obviously failed. Fortunately or not, his daughter had unmade it. And now there was a second chance sitting on his living room floor getting her cheeks squished by an enthusiastic 4-year-old. He wasn't going to waste it. No fair. Eri had apparently been watching the forehead kiss. She marched over, dragging Toga by the hand. The blonde girl followed with the careful, tentative steps of a child who wasn't used to being led somewhere good. Eri wants a kiss too. And Toga too. Sure. DABI crouched down and kissed Eri's forehead. Then he turned to Toga. The blonde girl looked at him. Those golden eyes. The same one that had been predatory is now just wide and uncertain. She didn't lean in or pull back, just waited, like she wasn't sure this was for her. DABI kissed her forehead too, the same way he did it for Eri. Toga blinked. Her hand came up and touched the spot where his lips had been. She looked confused, like she had been given something she didn't have a category for. Nobody's asking for MY affection around here, Rumi said from the table. She had her chin in her hand and she was trying to look offended and failing completely. Toga turned around. She walked over to Rumi, small, careful steps, and when Rumi bent down, expecting a hug or maybe a forehead bump, Toga stood on her toes and kissed Rumi on the cheek. Then she stepped back and looked at Rumi with that same uncertain expression, like she was waiting to be told she had done it wrong. Rumi's face did something complicated, as she blinked a few too many times. "Okay," she said, and her voice was rougher than it had been a second ago. "Okay. Yeah, that's fine." DABI watched the three of them, Rumi crouching down, Eri bouncing on her toes, Toga standing between them with the first traces of something that might eventually become a real smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. He let himself have the moment, then he straightened up. "Should we eat? The food is getting cold. Papa can just reheat it with his quirk," Eri said. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was pointing out something obvious that he had somehow overlooked. DABI opened his mouth, closed it, opened it. Again, his eldest daughter had just told him, to his face, to use his quirk, the blue fire that burned hot enough to melt steel, the flames he had used to dismantle 2 Nomu in under 3 minutes as a microwave. Toga was nodding along, a small, serious nod, like Eri had made an excellent point and she was in full agreement. Rumi was laughing. DABI looked at the three of them, his 2 daughters and his women, all conspiring against him. "You know what?" he said. "This isn't fair. None of it is, and it's getting harder to pretend otherwise." He reheated the food anyway. A week later, "I am really glad everyone could make it." Fuyumi clapped her hands together, looking around the table with the kind of determined brightness that only the eldest Todoroki daughter could produce under these circumstances. "We're all finally here together," she continued, her voice fluttering with a mix of relief and nerves. "I know it hasn't been easy, and schedules are complicated, but this is really something special." 3 brothers sat around the table, a sight that would have been a statistical impossibility just a few years ago. Shoto, Natsuo, DABI. "I really wish Eri and Rumi could have joined us too," Fuyumi added, pivoting back to the stove to retrieve the final plates. "Then it would have felt like a complete family gathering. Everyone here, all together for Ankh." She caught herself and adjusted. "Well, almost everyone." DABI looked at her and the effort she had put into the setting. The food, the effort, and moreover her carefully maintained enthusiasm that was holding back an ocean of anxiety within her. He sighed through his nose. How had he ended up here? Simple. The current gathering is apparently a celebration. A recovery party for Shoto organized by Fuyumi. DABI could have said no. He'd had the rejection halfway out of his mouth when the invite arrived. But as he looked at Shoto, now out of the hospital and sitting across from him with that same steady, unreadable stare, the words had died in his throat. He was here because of what happened in that hospital room. He heard from Rumi how Shoto had looked his daughter in the eye and told her exactly what she needed to hear when DABI's own voice had failed him. Eri had been brighter since that afternoon. He owed the kid. And if the price of that debt was a semi-awkward dinner with the ghosts of his past, then he'd just have to sit there and swallow the tempura. And then there was Fuyumi. He couldn't look at her face and the hope she kept pouring into something that had been broken longer than some of her siblings had been alive, and say no. He didn't have it in him. So here he was, regretting it mildly but present. "Yeah, it's a shame," DABI said, picking up his chopsticks. Eri dragged Rumi out shopping, so they're tied up for now. What exactly they were shopping for? Namely, a wardrobe for the tiny, amnesiac blonde currently living on their floor was a conversation he wasn't ready to have with this specific audience. "All right, let's start before everything gets cold." Fuyumi sat down and immediately started serving. She had come prepared. Conversation topics loaded, timing intervention, filling every gap before it could become a gap. He took a bite and it was really good. She had made the rolled omelet the way their mother used to, and the miso had the same depth to it, and just for a second. The food tasted like a kitchen he hadn't stood in for years. He relaxed slightly. Maybe this would be fine and he would get through one meal with his siblings without. The front door opened. Enji Todoroki stepped inside. The temperature in the room shifted, not physically. Endeavor's flames were out. He was in civilian clothes. He had come as close to non-threatening as a man his size could manage. But the effect was the same. The air got heavier and every person at the table felt it. DABI set down his chopsticks. "And there it goes," he said as he was already pushing back his chair. "I was actually starting to enjoy this, too." "Wait, Toya." Fuyumi was halfway out of her seat, her hands reaching out as if she could physically catch the departing mood. "Toya, please just sit. Just for a minute. Enjoy your dinner, Fuyumi." DABI was standing. His voice wasn't angry. It was flat, which was worse. "I am not interested in wrecking the vibe any more than it already is. You put a lot of work into this, so just eat. Have a good time." He looked at Shoto. "And for what you did for Eri at the hospital. Thank you. It mattered." Shoto held his gaze. "It wasn't anything special." "It was." DABI turned and walked toward the door. Endeavor was standing in the entryway. He hadn't moved further into the room. He had read the situation the moment he stepped inside. Seeing DABI getting up and Fuyumi's face, understood that his presence had just detonated the evening. DABI walked toward the door in his direction. His path would take him right past Endeavor's shoulder, through the entryway, and out. Endeavor raised one arm, not aggressively, just placed it across the door frame, blocking the exit. A barrier? Or a demand to stop? DABI looked at the arm, then up at Endeavor's face. Something behind his eyes flared. For a second, the temperature near his hands actually spiked. Then he pulled it back. He stepped to the side, trying to go around. "You can stay," Endeavor said. His voice was low. "I will leave." "Then you shouldn't have come here in the first place." DABI wasn't even looking at him. "Because all you've managed to do is kill whatever appetite I had left. So, thanks for that. Tuya." Fuyumi's voice drifted from the table, thin and trembling. "I was the one who asked Dad to come." "I know." DABI still wasn't looking at Endeavor. "That part was obvious, but I didn't expect him to actually have the nerve to show up. To walk through that door like he has any right to stand in the same room as the rest of us." He stopped himself, exhaling slowly before continuing. "Forget it. I am out." Endeavor drew a breath, the word already forming. "I am sore. Don't." DABI's voice dropped to something quiet and hard. "Don't you dare finish that. Not here and not to me." He turned and looked at Endeavor directly for the first time. His turquoise eyes, the same eyes he had inherited from the man standing in front of him, were burning. "How completely clueless are you?" DABI looked in utter disbelief. "Do you honestly believe you can just walk in here, say sorry, and have the world right itself? As if that would mean anything just because it's coming out of your mouth." Endeavor didn't move. He didn't respond. That silence only gave DABI the space he needed to dismantle him further. "Let me make this absolutely clear, since you still haven't figured it out," he went on, stepping closer, his voice lowering rather than rising. "You don't get to apologize, not in any way that matters, because that word isn't yours to use anymore. You don't get the meaning behind it, and you definitely don't get the comfort that comes with it." Another step, closing the distance until he was nearly in the man's shadow. "Because the second you say it, you get to tell yourself you've taken responsibility. You get to feel a little bit better because you did the right thing. You don't deserve that comfort, Enji. You don't deserve the relief of being told it's okay." He leaned in, his eyes never wavering. "And even if you said it anyway, even if you got down on your knees and screamed it 1,000 times until your throat bled, it wouldn't change the reality. None of us are going to give you what you're actually looking for. You want absolution. You want to be cleansed. But that's not something you're ever getting from this family. Not from me, not from Natsuo, not from Shoto. Not even from Fuyumi, no matter how much she wants to believe this can be fixed. There is no version of this story where the past gets undone. No amount of showing up to dinners or looking pathetic in doorways can erase the fact that you broke us. DABI stopped just inches away, having to tilt his head slightly to maintain the lock on Endeavor's eyes. Redemption? Making things right? A sound came out of DABI that might have been a laugh if there had been any humor in it. That's the funniest thing I've ever heard. Don't even dream about it. You live with it. Every single morning, you wake up and you look in the mirror and you see exactly what you destroyed. You carry that weight until your heart stops. That's as close as you're ever going to get to paying for the sins. DABI paused, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a threat. And that's only if I managed to keep holding myself back. The silence that followed was suffocating, a heavy shroud over the room. Now move. Endeavor's arm dropped. He didn't offer a rebuttal. His expression was a hollow, haunting thing. It wasn't anger or shock. It was the look of a man who had walked into a storm expecting to be struck, knowing even the sting of lightning was better than the cold. He had offered an apology knowing it would be spat back at him, because to Enji, even a curse was a tether. Even being told he was beyond redemption meant someone still acknowledged his existence in their world. DABI was almost through the door when a glass hit the floor. The explosion of water and shards across the hardwood forced everyone to turn. Natsuo was on his feet, his seat was kicked back. His fists were white-knuckled at his sides, and his face was a shade of raw, jagged red. Every single one of you, Natsuo began, his voice low and vibrating. Fuyumi reached out, her fingers trembling. Natsu! Every one! The roar cracked the air. Fuyumi flinched as if she'd been struck. Shoto's chopsticks froze mid-air. Even DABI, with one foot already in the night, paused and looked back. Every single one of you, Natsuo repeated, his eyes darting between DABI, Shoto, Endeavor, and Fuyumi. His gaze was bloodshot, wild with a decade of suppressed exhaustion. You all just act however you want, whenever you want. You drift in, drop your bombs, and walk away like nothing sticks, like nothing lingers, and not a single one of you stops to think about what it's like for me. Sitting here, forced to watch this funeral play out over and over again. He took a breath that hitched in his chest, ragged and painful. Fuyumi runs herself into the ground, trying to glue the pieces of a family together that died years ago. Shoto sits there like a statue, pretending none of it reaches him. Tuya walks in as he wishes, delivers his grand monologue, and walks out without looking back. He pivoted, his eyes locking onto Endeavor with a piercing, focused hatred. And him. He stands in the doorway looking pathetic, like regret alone is supposed to mean anything. Nobody spoke. I didn't even want to be here tonight. His hands swept across the table in a blind, frustrated arc, sending a plate clattering. Fine, he snapped, grabbing his jacket. The word was frayed at the edges. If everyone gets to decide how this goes, then I am done. I am done sitting here pretending I don't get a say in how much this hurts. I'm leaving. He didn't wait for a response. He stormed past the table, past Fuyumi, who was now weeping silently into her hands, and past Shoto, who remained unervingly still. He shoved past DABI in the doorway, entering the night without another word. He didn't slam the door. That was the worst part. He opened it, stepped through, and clicked it shut with care. DABI stood in the entryway for a few seconds. He looked at Natsuo's empty chair, the spilled food and the broken glass on the floor. Without a word, DABI turned and followed his brother into the dark. Inside, Endeavor stood paralyzed. He looked at Fuyumi, sobbing at the table with her face buried in her palms, and then at Shoto, who sat staring at his untouched food with eyes that seemed to be looking at something very far away. Recognizing the ruin he had brought with him, Endeavor turned and walked out. The door clicked shut one last time, leaving the youngest and the eldest siblings alone in the wreckage of a dinner that was never meant to be. Fuyumi pressed her palms against her eyes as her shoulders were shaking. "I thought." Her voice was muffled behind her hands. "I really believed things were starting to get better. Mom's improving, Toya's alive, you're opening up to people. I kept thinking that if I could just bring everyone into the same room, even for an hour, that we could finally start being whole." She couldn't finish the thought. The reality was laid out in front of her. Spilled food, broken glass, empty chairs. Toya was right, Shoto said. Fuyumi looked up, her eyes swollen and rimmed with a painful red. "Not you too, Shoto. Please, not right now. Do you actually believe he deserves forgiveness?" Shoto asked. Fuyumi didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, almost like a confession. "But don't worry," Shoto continued, his voice steady. "What you did wasn't pointless." Fuyumi searched his face. She was looking for pity, platitudes, or the kind of empty reassurance people give when they don't know what else to say. "Are you just trying to make me feel better?" she asked, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. "After the night turned into this, I am being honest." He picked up his chopsticks and set them down again. "It's true that it turned into a mess, but I believe that might be the only way this works right now." Fuyumi stared at him, confused. "Everyone in this family has been holding things in." Shoto looked at the empty chairs. "For years, all of us have kept it buried, and tonight some of it finally surfaced. It might not have come out the way you hoped, but it came out." He paused. "That means next time, if there is one, there's a little less left to spill over. Maybe it doesn't hit as hard, and someone stays for an extra 5 minutes before they walk away." He looked at the broken glass on the floor. "Natsuo, that was the first time I've ever seen him that angry," Shoto said, his tone more thoughtful than reactive. He finally said everything on his mind without censoring himself. "I think that matters more than it seems, even if it doesn't seem like something positive right now." Yumi was quiet for a long time. "Tuya, though," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The things he said, the way he looked at Dad, like he wanted to erase him." "Yeah." Shoto didn't sugarcoat it. "He is past anything we can handle right now. I don't know what fixes that, or if anything ever will." Fuyumi pressed her lips together and nodded once. "But you still got him here," Shoto reminded her. "He sat down. He ate what you made. He even thanked me for Eri. That's more than I thought we would ever get, even a few months ago." Fuyumi's eyes filled up again. She wiped them quickly, almost aggressively, as if she were angry at the tears for falling. "When did you get like this?" she said, and there was something in her voice that was half a laugh and half a sob. "When did you start being able to say things like that?" Shoto thought about it. "I don't know," he said. "Probably recently." He stood up and started picking up the broken glass from the floor, piece by piece, placing each one carefully on the table. "I will help you clean up," he said. "Then we can put away the leftovers." The omelet was really good. Fuyumi. She watched him for a second. Her little brother, crouching on the floor of a ruined dinner party, picking up glass with bandaged hands. Then, she got down on her knees beside him and started to help. Meanwhile, outside the Todoroki house, the air felt heavier, like the night itself hadn't quite settled. DABI found Natsuo 3 blocks down, leaning against a rusted guardrail overlooking a storm drain, his posture rigid, not breaking, just holding together through sheer force. The streetlights above flickered, a low electrical hum bleeding into the silence. For a moment, DABI said nothing. Truth was, He wasn't entirely sure why he had followed. Part of him would have rather go home and play with his sweet little girls. So he stepped up beside the rail, a few feet away, hands in his pockets, gaze drifting to the slow, dark water below. "Go away, Toya," Natsuo spat, his voice sounding like it had been dragged over gravel. "I am not in the mood for a lecture on how I ruined Fuyumi's night. I wasn't planning on giving one." DABI replied evenly, his tone a quiet contrast. "And if we're keeping score, I didn't exactly help the situation either." A brief pause. "Honestly," he added, glancing sideways, "I think you handled it fine. Especially the way you handled that glass was top tier and very dramatic." Natsuo whipped his head around, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "Is everything a joke to you? Do you even care? You walk in there like a ghost, drop a bucket of salt on everyone's wounds, and then drift out. You get to be the victim and villain and everything else. What do I get to be?" He stepped closer, his chest heaving. "I am the one who stayed, Toya. The one who sat at that table for 10 years watching Fuyumi try to smile while the house smelled like burnt hair and misery. I didn't get to become some tragedy people talk about. I just got left behind to remember every part of it whether I wanted to or not." DABI didn't flinch. He let the words hit him, his expression remaining as flat and unreadable as the water in the drain. "You think I don't know that?" DABI asked quietly. "I think you don't care," Natsuo roared. "You're so obsessed with making him pay that you're stepping all over us to get to him. You're no better than he is when you do that." The air between them suddenly felt thin. DABI turned his head slowly, his turquoise eyes catching the dim light. There was a flicker of something there, not anger, but a hollow, jagged recognition. "Maybe I am not," DABI admitted. The honesty was so blunt it made Natsuo stumble over his next breath. "I have spent a long time being a tool, Natsu, and tools don't usually check to see who's standing in the war zone." He straightened up, finally pulling his hands out of his pockets. He took a step toward his younger brother, stopping just outside his personal space. "But you're wrong about one thing," DABI said, his voice dropping. "I didn't walk away because I don't care about what it's like for you. I did because if I stayed in that room with him for one more minute, I would have burned that entire house down with all of you inside." Natsuo searched his face, his own anger flickering into a confused, painful uncertainty. "You think you're the only one who remembers?" DABI continued. "I remember you hiding behind the sofa whenever he started shouting, and Fuyumi trying to distract us with cards, so we wouldn't have to hear what was happening in that training room, and I haven't forgotten a single second of any of it." He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he let it drop onto Natsuo's shoulder. It wasn't a warm gesture. DABI's skin was always a bit too hot. "You're the only one who actually got to grow up with something close to normal, Natsu, or at least as close as anyone in this family ever gets," DABI said, his voice steady but quieter now. "So don't let my mess or his regret drag you into it." Natsuo looked down at the hand on his shoulder, then back up at DABI. The fury was still there, but the edge had been blunted and he looked exhausted. "It's all so messy," Natsuo whispered. "Yeah," DABI agreed, pulling his hand back. "A disaster, and it's probably going to stay a disaster for a long time." He turned, starting to walk back toward the direction of the faculty dorms, but paused after a few steps. "Fuyumi's probably still crying," DABI said over his shoulder. "If you go back now, you can tell her the omelet was good. She will believe you more than she would believe me." Natsuo stayed by the rail for a long time, watching DABI's shadow disappear into the night. He took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs, and finally turned toward home. The workplace internships finally drew to a close. It had been 2 weeks since the siblings' disastrous dinner, and a full 3 weeks since the attack on UA. The trio Midoriya, Bakugo, and Shoto were officially discharged from the hospital, having spent the tail end of their recovery under the watchful and increasingly irritated eyes of the school's medical staff. Immediately, they reintegrated into their respective programs, and once again, the classes resumed in UA. Time passed, and it was now the last week of May, which meant the end-of-term exams were exactly 7 days out. Written and practical, both are mandatory, weighted heavily enough to make or break a hero student's trajectory. Class 1A was handling this information with varying degrees of maturity. We're dead. Kaminari had his forehead pressed against his desk, his voice muffled by the wood. I haven't studied anything. I don't even remember what subjects we're supposed to have. Do we still do math? Is that a thing? Same. Ishido was slumped in her chair. I kept telling myself I will start after the internships, and then the internships ended, and then I told myself I will start Monday, and then it was Tuesday, and then it was 3 weeks later and I still haven't opened a textbook. I, too, have allowed my academic discipline to be consumed by the abyss. Tokoyami added, his tone suggesting he was confessing to a high-ranking war crime. Sato shook his head. You do realize these exams are going to be harder than the midterms, right? Aizawa-sensei already warned us that the difficulty scales up, so if you barely scraped by last time, this isn't going to go well unless you actually put in the work now. Don't, Kaminari said. Don't finish that sentence. From the front of the room, Midoriya pivoted in his seat, his eyes bright with that familiar, frantic helpfulness. Hey, we've still got a week, and that's actually plenty of time if we use it properly. I have got color-coded notes from every lecture since April, so I can make copies for everyone, and if we divide the subjects into study groups and rotate through them, we can cover everything efficiently without anyone getting overwhelmed. Midoriya is right. Ida stood up stiffly. A week of dedicated preparation is more than sufficient. I recommend a minimum of 4 hours of focused study per evening, organized by credit weight, with 15-minute breaks for hydration and light calisthenics. Ida, buddy, I love you, but 4 hours a night is going to actually liquefy my brain. Kaminari groaned. Perhaps the grades are simply a direct reflection of the effort invested. Shoto chimed in from the back. He looked genuinely curious. If you don't review the material, isn't the outcome just a predictable consequence? Dead silence. Kaminari and Ishido stared at him with identical expressions of betrayal. He is right, but God, he didn't have to say it like that. Ishido whispered. Yaoyorozu stood up, sensing the plummeting morale. If anyone would like assistance, I would be more than happy to host a study session at my residence. I have already prepared review materials for the core subjects, and I think working through problems together might be more effective than studying alone. The response was a stampede. Jiro was in before Momo finished the sentence. Kaminari and Ishido practically threw themselves at her desk. Weeping with gratitude, Ojiro and Shiro were signing up within seconds. From across the room, Bakugo grabbed Kirishima by the collar of his uniform. Oi, you're studying with me. I will drill this crap into your thick skull if I have to blast it in there. Man, that sounds extremely painful and probably illegal, Kirishima said, though he looked relieved. It's supposed to. At lunch, Midoriya's group claimed their usual table. Him, Ida, Todoroki, Uraraka, Azui, and Hagakure. I feel okay about the written part, Uraraka said, unwrapping her bento. I mean, I am not gonna ace it or anything, but okay, it's the practical that's freaking me out. We don't even know what it is yet. Historically, the practical exam varies each year, Ida noted, adjusting his glasses. Last year's format was significantly different from the year before. We can't assume anything based on precedent. That's not helping, Ida. I was merely providing vital context. The written exam is just a matter of proper preparation. Ribbit. Azui added, her calm demeanor acting as a much-needed anchor. But Achiko is right. The practical is the unknown variable. I just wish we had a hint. Hagakure's voice drifted from above her empty chair. Even a tiny one. As if summoned by the mention of a tiny hint, Nito Monoma materialized beside their table. He had the unerring instinct of someone who could sense Class 1A having a pleasant conversation and felt personally obligated to end it. Well, if it isn't the golden children of Class 1A. He leaned against the table, a predatory grin stretched across his face. Feeling confident, robust? I must say, for a class that spends half its time being a magnet for national disasters, you look remarkably relaxed. Must be that special treatment, HM? The teachers probably hand-feed you the answers just to keep the spotlight from dimming. Monoma. Itsuka Kendo appeared behind him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and second-hand embarrassment. That's enough. I am merely fostering interclass relations. Kendo, I am being a social butterfly. Is it a crime to be friendly? He was silenced mid-sentence as Kendo's hand enlarged and tapped him firmly on the head, sending him into a heap. I am so sorry about him, Kendo said, looking at Midoriya's table with a weary smile. Please, just ignore everything he just said. Oh, it's fine, really? Midoriya started. A small figure appeared beside All Might, barely 85 centimeters tall, emerging so quietly that even the symbol of peace was startled. Hello. All Might jerked slightly, caught off guard. Easy there, All Might. Nizu's high-pitched voice hummed with a touch of mischief. It's just me, your principal. I didn't mean to startle you. Please don't call me that when I'm in this form, All Might whispered reflexively, his hand clutching his chest as he gestured to his gaunt, sickly appearance. Nizu didn't argue. Instead, he simply extended his small paws upward in a wordless, familiar request. All Might sighed, a sound of fond resignation, and reached down to hoist the principal onto his shoulder. There is no one else here, Nizu assured him, settling comfortably against the collar of All Might's oversized suit. I've ensured the feeds are looped. No need to worry about exposure. All Might nodded, his gaze returning to the training ground below where Midoriya stood like a statue in the center of the concrete floor. He didn't bother questioning Nizu's security measures. When the smartest creature on the planet said a room was private, the room was private. It seems our DABI is trying something interesting again, Nizu observed, his paws folding behind his back. He truly is a man of many layers. Utterly fascinating to observe. Wouldn't you agree? The statement hung in the air, weighted by a nuance that only someone of Nizu's intellect could truly appreciate. To the world, DABI was a survivor, a phoenix risen from the ashes of a tragic childhood. But to Nizu, DABI was a statistical anomaly. He was, by every metric the principal possessed, the most interesting human currently walking the earth. According to Nizu's carefully calibrated assessment systems, DABI was the most interesting human he had ever encountered. Nizu's conclusion wasn't a matter of fascination. It came from how DABI had become the singular point of failure in every predictive model Nizu had ever constructed. The boy was a walking contradiction. He was a child who had survived medical impossibilities, awakening from a coma with a personality reconstruction that defied standard trauma recovery profiles. Even his survival was an insult to probability. Nizu had calculated the odds during the USJ where he fought against two high-class Nomus. In particular instance, DABI's chance of survival had hovered somewhere below 15%. Yet, he continued to stand and violate every behavioral model Nizu could throw at him. For a creature who lived in a world of predetermined outcomes, DABI was an exhilarating, infuriating variable. Nizu respects the child's tenacity more than anything. Their relationship hadn't started this way. Far from it. When DABI first arrived at UA, fresh from a long sleep and a broken home, Nizu's initial assessment had been cold, clinical, and utterly damning. He had assigned a 95% probability of villain infiltration to the boy's profile. The logic had been sound, A traumatized child captured by villains during his most formative years, abandoned by a family that had moved on, and given a miraculous recovery that hinted at dark, external intervention. DABI was the perfect candidate for a deep-cover operative. Nizu had monitored him intensively that first year, waiting for the inevitable betrayal. Never came, but the betrayal never happened. Instead, DABI kept doing the one thing Nizu's models couldn't account for. He kept choosing to be a hero and had demonstrated moral principles that were genuinely held, not performed for surveillance. Nizu had been forced to recalibrate his assessment. Not a spy, genuine hero aspirant. However, probability of completing training, 23% due to catastrophic medical instability. The math behind that prediction had been a simple, brutal fact. DABI's body was damaged beyond limits due to quirk overuse that was devouring him from the inside out. Cancer cells had been detected in his lungs and skin, and his projected lifespan had been capped at 5 years maximum. And yet, he had been wrong again. The kid somehow survived and reached his graduation day only to get himself involved in a villain incident while trying to save 2 heroes who he isn't related to by any means. It was him risking his life, which hadn't ended with this single incident, and will probably continue until his last breath, just like how his predictions failed over time and time. Fortunately, the now-turned man went through a quirk evolution. His cancer disappeared. His overall strength had seen a massive jump. And until and unless DABI does something reckless, he wouldn't be able to be defeated by normal means. He is too strong and can be on par with All Might. Nizu allowed himself a small, dark smile thinking about the Hero Public Safety Commission's current assessment of DABI. The commission thought they had him controlled, and the most iconic assumption of considering his family connections was leverage. Thought they could manipulate him through standard pressure tactics. Idiots. His family was his only aspect that is keeping him stable. But they were also his trigger point. If the commission so much as touched a single hair on anyone DABI cared about, Nizu thought with cold certainty, they would be making the greatest mistake in the history of hero society. Because DABI, when truly angry, wasn't bound by the rules that constrained other heroes. His personality might have someone easygoing, but the animal in him is still somewhere deep within him. Nizu's expression soured, remembering the attack on DABI's residence just days ago. It remained one of his most bitter failures. He wouldn't have guessed there are villain groups, multiple groups, that had the nerve to infiltrate UAs multiple times. Maybe I should really share my conclusion with the rest of the UA staff, Nizu thought. The fact that the villain group was specifically targeted when DABI was absent suggested inside information. It might just not be a student traitor, Nizu concluded grimly. Possibly staff-level compromise. The investigation was ongoing, but the implications were disturbing. UA's security had been considered impenetrable, and now that illusion was shattered. Nizu had personally apologized to both DABI and Rumi. They had been dissatisfied, rightfully so, but had respected his position enough not to make the meeting awkward. Small mercies. He had also ensured the incident wouldn't leak beyond those directly involved. The HPSC especially couldn't know. But the real concern was DABI's reaction. He had been too calm during the aftermath. Sure, he had requested permission to personally interrogate the captured attackers. Nizu had granted it because denying DABI at that moment would have been both useless and dangerous. The interrogation had been brutal. People forgot that DABI's gentle demeanor with students and colleagues was a choice, not his nature. Regardless of the methods, the information extracted had been valuable. But more importantly, it had confirmed something. The League of Villains had made a permanent enemy. Next time they appear, Nizu thought, watching DABI coordinate the training exercise below, he will be going for kills. And stopping him when he's not holding back is difficult. He thought specifically of Kurogiri, the purple mist with the teleportation quirk. If that creature crossed paths with DABI again, the probability of its survival was effectively 0. How is the investigation going? All Might's voice was reluctant, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. Any results yet? What are you expecting, Tashinori? Nizu replied with a touch of his characteristic bluntness. We began digging only hours ago. These things require a delicate touch and significant processing time. He tilted his head, studying the skeletal hero's pained expression. But you seem more curious about this than you're letting on. All Might remained silent, staring down at the concrete. The silence was an answer in itself. The investigation Nizu referenced concerned Nana Shimura, the seventh user of One for All Might's mentor and mother figure. DABI had proposed the search that morning, immediately after All Might had disclosed what little he knew about the predecessors. The suggestion had been met with immediate, vehement refusal. All Might had explained his reasoning. Nana had intentionally severed ties with her family. He didn't know details about her child or descendants. She'd made that choice to protect them from All for One's reach. Investigating her family would violate her privacy and potentially endanger people she'd sacrificed everything to keep safe. DABI had listened to all of this, nodded. I'm doing it anyway. His voice is flat and unapologetic. I'm just letting you know in advance because I'd rather not go behind your back. The sheer audacity had actually impressed Nizu. Most people, even pro-heroes, would have folded the moment the symbol of peace said no. DABI had simply informed him that his opinion was noted and would be ignored. Eventually, All Might had agreed to cooperate, partly because he knew DABI would be going ahead regardless, and partly because some small part of him wanted to know. But neither All Might nor Nizu understood why DABI was pushing this so hard. It wasn't the first time DABI had insisted on something that made no logical sense. Previous instances had eventually revealed hidden reasoning, but never immediately. Anyway, the primary objective of the investigation was to confirm if Nana Shimura had surviving descendants. The secondary, to find where they were currently hiding in Japan. Also, were they aware of their connection to One for All's legacy? Nizu had already begun cross-referencing the Shimura household registry with Nana's final known movements before her death. He was currently bypassing security protocols that technically required high-level warrants, but in the principal's mind, legal flexibility was a small price to pay when the alternative was All for One finding a target first. Watching the training exercise below, Nizu's bead-like eyes shifted to the back of DABI's head. He knows something, Nizu concluded. Something about Nana's descendants that is urgent enough to justify pushing All Might this hard. The earlier they discovered whatever DABI already knew, the better positioned they'd be to respond. That much was clear from DABI's body language during the discussion. Why not just tell them? The most logical answer. He couldn't explain how he knew without revealing something else. Some other source of information that would raise more questions than it answered. Nizu's attention returned fully to the training ground below. Before arriving here, both All Might and DABI had requested permission to use the facilities. Mostly formality, but also seeking Nizu's assessment of DABI's proposed methodology for helping Midoriya. The theory was sound. If One for All truly stockpiled previous users' quirks along with raw power, then creating conditions where Midoriya's consciousness was trapped might force interaction with the vestiges. Using Shinso's brainwashing to create that scenario is simply marvelous. Nizu had immediately approved, as he was also curious to see the outcome. DABI's going to show us something interesting today, Nizu thought with anticipation. Below, Midoriya's body suddenly convulsed under Shinso's quirk. Green lightning erupted, but it wasn't the steady, controlled full cowling. It was jagged, chaotic, and tinged with a dark, secondary energy. Then black tendrils burst from his arms, and they moved like organic, predatory limbs, whipping through the air. There it is. Nizu murmured. All Might's intake of breath was sharp. Is that? A new quirk manifestation, Nizu confirmed. DABI's theory was correct. One for All is evolving. The black tendrils lashed out wildly, one narrowly missing Shinso, who stumbled back, his concentration shattered by the sheer primal force of the output. Shinso's concentration broke from shock, and the brainwashing was released. As the mental fog cleared, the black energy hissed and retracted into Midoriya as he collapsed to his knees, gasping. All Might was already moving, vaulting the railing with speed that belied his skeletal form. Young Midoriya, Nizu remained on the railing, watching everything with calculating eyes. Did he predict the outcome? Which raised the question, what else did DABI know that he wasn't sharing? And more importantly, should Nizu be worried about the answer? For now, he decided the benefits outweighed the risks. DABI had proven himself repeatedly. Whatever secrets he kept, they seemed aligned with protecting others rather than harming them. Most interesting human indeed, he thought, watching All Might reach Midoriya while DABI approached from the opposite direction. Let's see what other surprises you have in store. Few minutes earlier, they waited as DABI stood, watching Midoriya's empty body stand motionless in the center of the training ground. Aizawa was to the left, goggles ready, eyes fixed on Midoriya's hands for any sign of quirk discharge. All Might in his skinny form is still watching from above, while someone else seems to join him. Shinso stood 10 feet from Midoriya, maintaining the connection, his expression focused. Bakugo leaned against the wall, watching and hating every second of it. But nothing happened. 10 seconds, 30 and a full minute. Midoriya's body stood there like a mannequin, breathing, blinking occasionally, completely vacant with no sign that anything was happening inside him at all. DABI tilted his head, waited another 30 seconds. Shinso, can you release him? Shinso snapped his fingers and Midoriya's eyes focused. A sharp intake of breath, his body jerking slightly as awareness flooded back in. He blinked, looked around, and then at DABI. Anything? DABI asked. Midoriya shook his head. No. I cowl. He wasn't about to explain much given the situation he is currently in, but DABI understood the point. So they tried again. Shinso put him under, held him there for 2 minutes, and released him. Midoriya came back with the same answer. Empty, blank, nothing. A third time, same result. DABI stared at the sky for a few seconds thinking. Then something clicked. The sports festival. When Midoriya had first touched the vestige space under Shinso's brainwashing, it hadn't been during a calm, controlled test. It was during a fight, a moment where Midoriya was in danger of losing, of being walked out of the ring and failing in front of his idol. The desperateness and emotional state are on another level, and one for almost probably has direct connections to the wielder emotions. Maybe it's not working because you don't feel the sense of danger? DABI said. Midoriya looked at him. What do you mean? You're standing in a controlled training ground surrounded by pros, so nobody here is trying to hurt you, and there's no real danger or pressure pushing you, DABI said, his gaze drifting briefly toward the blonde kid leaning to the wall with his arms crossed and that permanent look of hostility. Your quirk might respond when something forces it to. His lips curved, just slightly. A smile that Midoriya had learned to associate with his immediate future was getting significantly worse. Bakugo, DABI raised his voice. Looks like you won't have to just stand around after all. Why do I feel like you planned this from the very start? Midoriya asked, his voice wavering with a suspicion that was promptly ignored. Bakugo pushed off the wall, his eyes sharpened. He didn't understand the full picture, yet he could feel the gaps and the conversation happening over his head. But the part he understood was enough. About damn time, he said. Sensei, is this really okay? Midoriya stammered, his feet shuffling into a defensive stance as he looked at Bakugo, who was currently rolling his shoulders with terrifying enthusiasm. Relax, you're fine, DABI said, leaning back against the perimeter wall with easy confidence. Aizawa and I are right here, so nothing's going to go sideways. That suddenly sounds a lot less reassuring than it did a minute ago. Bakugo, DABI cut in, his eyes narrowing as he fixed the blonde with a steady look. Don't hold back. Go all out. If you treat him like he's fragile, this won't work. Bakugo's grin split his face. Ha! Like you even needed to say it. I was planning on crushing him the second you mentioned his name. Midoriya. DABI turned to him. This time, don't fall back on full cowling or total concentration breathing. Strip away the techniques and the stabilizers. I want you to fight him with whatever is left when you have nothing but your own instincts and your back against the wall. Midoriya's face went pale. Sensei, without full cowling I can't possibly. That's the point. Across the field, Bakugo was bouncing on the balls of his feet. A part of him was annoyed. Fighting Midoriya with this many handicaps felt like being told to arm wrestle a toddler. Where was the challenge? Where was the satisfaction in beating someone who had been stripped of every tool that made him dangerous? But underneath the annoyance, deeper down, in the place where his combat instincts lived, something else was stirring, a feeling, a sense that whatever DABI was trying to pull out of the nerd, if it actually worked, something really interesting was about to happen. And there were still things Bakugo needed to settle. Questions that had been haunting him since the battle trial, through the sports festival, and every day since that useless, quirkless nobody had shown up with a power capable of rivaling him. How? That was the question that wouldn't leave him alone. How did Izuku Midoriya, the kid who couldn't throw a ball, couldn't run a lap, or do a single thing that required physical ability, suddenly start shooting lightning out of his fists? Where did it come from? People didn't just wake up with quirks like that. But it all traced back to what Midoriya had said after the battle trial, something so absurd it refused to leave his mind. He hadn't been born with his quirk, but had received it from someone else. A borrowed quirk? The thing that had been driving Bakugo insane since the start of his high school, the gap, the sudden leap from nothing to something, had a stupid, simple explanation that somehow made everything more confusing. From who? How? And why him? Those questions had lingered unanswered because Midoriya never explained and Bakugo never asked. Asking would have meant admitting he cared. But at some point something else clicked. Whether the power was borrowed, given, or stolen stopped mattering. Because none of it changed the only thing that had ever been true for him. His path was still the same: to crush anyone in his way, push past every obstacle, and climb to the top on his own terms. And Izuku Midoriya was standing right in his way. He wasn't a background extra anymore. He wasn't the shaking middle schooler who flinched under a hard stare, but a rival, an obstacle, someone Bakugo had to push through. He hadn't lost because of weakness. He had lost because he underestimated the nerd. Bakugo wasn't making the same mistake twice. Whenever you're ready, Deku, Bakugo said, as his palms were sparking. Midoriya raised his fists. Go, DABI said. The fight didn't last long. Without full cowling and total concentration, Midoriya was slower, weaker, and softer than everything Bakugo had spent years training to destroy. His usual analytical mind was still working, reading Bakugo's movements, predicting attack patterns, identifying openings, but his body couldn't execute fast enough to capitalize on any of it. Bakugo's first explosion caught him in the guard and sent him skidding back 5 meters. Midoriya recovered instantly, trying to circle left. He read the next feint perfectly, but he still ate the follow-up because his legs couldn't carry him out of the blast radius in time. A right hook from Bakugo connected with his shoulder and spun him, and an explosion to his midsection doubled him over. Midoriya tried to counter. He timed the gap between Bakugo's recovery frames, found the window, and committed to a strike with everything he had. It was a perfect read, but his fist hit the air because Bakugo had already adjusted, and the counter-explosion caught Midoriya in the chest and put him on his back. He got up, tried again with the same tactic, read the pattern, found the angle, threw everything he had into a low tackle that should have caught Bakugo off balance. Bakugo simply sidestepped, caught the boy by his collar, and slammed him into the ground with a sickening thud. It went on like that. Midoriya's mind kept reaching the right answers, but his body failed to keep up, identifying the correct response only to execute it a fraction too late, spotting openings without the speed to capitalize on them, and with every exchange ending the same way. Every exchange ended with the same sound, Midoriya hitting the floor, and with every repetition, Bakugo was getting more heated. "Come on, Deku." Bakugo grabbed him by the shirt and hauled him upright. "Is this IT? Stand up straight. Give me something. I didn't come out here to kick around a ragdoll." He shoved Midoriya back, his palms smoking. Bakugo came at him again, faster and harder. But even through the frustration and the demand for more, he held back. He would have died before admitting it, but his explosions were landing without reaching full power. His strikes were connecting without targeting anything vital, and he was driving Midoriya to his absolute limit without crossing the line into breaking him. It was the most disciplined Bakugo had ever been in a fight, even if it looked like a massacre to the untrained eye. "That's enough," DABI called out. "Take a break, Midoriya." Bakugo pulled back instantly. He turned away, smoke still curling from his fingertips, and began muttering a string of insults about wastes of time and useless nerds. Midoriya collapsed to his hands and knees. His breath came in ragged, burning hitches as the sheer physical toll caught up to him. His arms already bruised, his uniform was scorched and torn, and every muscle in his body felt the weight of its own limitations. Off to the side, Aizawa had pulled Shinso away from the center of the grounds. Throughout the fight, he was demonstrating the mechanics of the capture scarf. How to hold it, build momentum through movement and the loops, while Shinso watched unexpressively. Dabi's gaze drifted across the training ground until it landed on All Might, who was standing off to the side in quiet conversation with Nizu. And though he could already guess the nature of that discussion, he chose to ignore it for now. Midoriya remained on the ground, still catching his breath, when something else drew his attention. "Sensei," Midoriya croaked, looking up at Dabi. "Is Shinso-kun? Is he being trained by Aizawa-sensei?" Dabi glanced toward them before speaking. "It's not official yet, but I recommended him to Aizawa because the kid's got the right temperament," he said, pausing as he watched Shinso attempt a trial throw. "I have also spoken to Principal Nizu, and while the details are still being worked out, Shinso will be allowed to participate in the final exam. And since Class 1A has an open spot after that first-day expulsion, if he proves himself, he has a chance to transfer in." He looked at Midoriya. "But he has still got a long way to go, because the general education course doesn't cover combat training. So physically he is starting from zero, and that means everything from here on out is going to be an uphill climb for him." Midoriya watched Shinso work. The purple-haired boy threw the scarf, watched it go limp and miss the target, and then immediately recoiled it. There was no frustration on his face, only a grim persistence. His mind drifted back to the sports festival. Standing across from Shinso in the ring, hearing his voice and feeling the brainwashing take hold. But more than that, he remembered the look in Shinso's eyes. It was a look he recognized from his own reflection in the years before he met All Might. Must be nice, being born with a heroic quirk. Some of us weren't so lucky. The bitterness in those words had stayed with him. It was the frustration of someone who had the drive, the intelligence, the will to be a hero, yet had been placed in the wrong box simply because his quirk didn't look the part. And now Shinso was here, on a UA training ground, learning capture techniques from an underground hero. He was fighting for a place in the hero course through nothing but persistence and a refusal to accept what he'd been handed. Also, didn't Dabi-sensei also get transferred similarly? And unlike Shinso, he didn't even have a mentor to guide him. How hard must he have worked? Midoriya glanced down at his own hands. Bruised, scraped, still trembling from the beating Bakugo had just given him. Shinso didn't have one for all or total concentration or any of the advantages Midoriya had been given. Yet, he was pushing forward with only what he had. So what was Midoriya's excuse? He pushed himself to his feet. "Sensei," he said, and though the exhaustion hadn't left his voice, something beneath it had changed. "I can start again."
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.